She was dying in a mansion of marble and gold, until the man who served her tea became the only one who saw her alive. The bedroom smelled of lilies and antiseptic, flowers delivered weekly by a florist who never asked who they were for, and medical supplies arranged with the precision of someone who cared about appearance more than recovery. Isabella lay propped against Egyptian cotton pillows, her body a fragile collection of bones beneath a cashmere throw, watching her husband fold his Tom Ford suits into a leather carry-on. "The retreat is only 10 days, Richard said without looking at her. His voice carried the same tone he used for conference calls. Efficient, detached. "Dr. Patel says you're stable. The nurse comes twice daily. Daniel will handle everything else. Daniel will handle everything else." As if she were a household account to be managed. Isabella's fingers traced the 4-port in her left hand, a permanent fixture now, after 6 months of treatments that prolonged her life without improving it. "You could cancel," she said softly, already knowing the answer. "The Singapore deal could wait. We've discussed this." Richard checked his Rolex, a gesture that meant the conversation was over. "Harrison Tech won't wait. This merger determines the next decade of our lives." Our lives. The phrase rang hollow. They hadn't shared a life in years, only square footage, tax brackets, and the elaborate fiction of a marriage that looked perfect in Forbes photo spreads. He crossed to the bed with the mechanical obligation of a man fulfilling a contract. His lips brushed her forehead. Cool, brief, already gone. "I'll call when I land." He wouldn't. The door closed with an expensive, well-oiled click. Isabella listened to his footsteps descend the curved staircase, cross the marble foyer, exchange brief words with someone, Daniel, probably, and then the distinct growl of his Bentley pulling away. Silence rushed in to fill the spaces he left behind. She closed her eyes, fighting the familiar ache that had nothing to do with her failing kidneys. This was the loneliness that no amount of wealth could furnish away, the kind that lived in expensive rooms and echoed off imported tiles. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Mrs. Ashford?" The voice was gentle, careful. "May I come in?" "Yes." The door opened slowly, and Daniel entered carrying a silver tray, her afternoon medications arranged beside a pot of chamomile tea and a single butter cookie from the French bakery she'd once mentioned liking, months ago, in passing. He remembered. Daniel Cross had been in their employ for 2 years, hired through an elite domestic staffing agency that catered to billionaires who wanted invisible excellence. He was in his mid-30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and eyes the color of aged whiskey. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the servitude, an education in his vocabulary, a sadness in his careful movements, a gentleness that seemed born of understanding rather than training. He set the tray on her bedside table and began arranging her pills in the small crystal dish, his movements practiced and sure. "You don't have to do this yourself," Isabella said, though she was grateful he did. The nurses were efficient but clinical. Daniel made it feel less like treatment and more like care. "I know this isn't in your job description. Neither is letting you take them alone." His eyes flicked to hers briefly, a moment of contact that felt almost dangerous in its honesty, before returning to his task. "Your husband asked me to oversee your care while he's away." Asked. She wondered if Richard had actually phrased it as a question or simply added it to Daniel's list of duties, somewhere between maintaining the wine cellar and managing the landscaping crew. "I'm sorry you're stuck with me," she said, attempting lightness but landing somewhere near despair. Daniel paused, his hand hovering over the morphine tablets. When he looked at her this time, he didn't look away. "You're not something to be stuck with, Mrs. Ashford." The words landed in the quiet room like stones in still water, rippling outward. Isabella's breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that, as if she were a person rather than a diagnosis, in longer than she could remember. She wanted to respond, to thank him, to ask him what he meant, but her throat had closed around the unexpected kindness. Daniel seemed to sense her struggle. He stepped back, returning to the safe distance of professionalism. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything. The intercom is by your bed." "Daniel." He stopped at the door, his hand on the frame. "Thank you. For the cookie." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful armor he wore. "You're welcome." He left, pulling the door almost closed but not quite, the way one might for a child afraid of the dark. Isabella stared at the space he'd occupied, at the tea steaming gently in its porcelain cup, at the cookie she hadn't had the appetite for in weeks. She picked it up anyway, took a small bite, and tasted butter and vanilla and something else she couldn't quite name. It tasted like being remembered. Downstairs, in the servants' quarters behind the industrial kitchen, Daniel leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. "You're not something to be stuck with." He shouldn't have said that. Shouldn't have let his carefully constructed boundaries slip, even for a moment. But watching her lie there, this woman who'd once been vibrant, if the photographs throughout the house were any indication, watching her apologize for existing, for being inconvenient in her own suffering. It had cracked something in him he'd worked 2 years to keep sealed. He moved to the small desk in his room and pulled out the bottom drawer, retrieving a worn leather wallet from beneath folded undershirts. Inside, protected by a plastic sleeve, was a photograph. A little girl with dark curls in his eyes, sitting on a woman's lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Emma. Rachel. Gone 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days. He'd been a literature professor before, Dr. Daniel Cross, with a PhD from Cambridge and a comfortable life in Boston. Then came the accident. The black ice. The guardrail that should have held but didn't. The hospital chaplains practiced sympathy. And the guilt that made breathing feel like theft. He disappeared after that, shed his old life like a snake's skin, and sought punishment in invisibility. Domestic service provided that. No one looked at servants, not really. They were ghosts who cleaned and cooked and kept the machinery of wealth running smoothly. It was exactly what he deserved. But Isabella Ashford, trapped in her own kind of prison, dying by degrees in a house full of everything except what mattered, she'd somehow managed to make him feel seen again, even when she barely had the strength to see herself. It terrified him. He returned the photograph to its hiding place and checked his watch. She'd need her evening medications in 4 hours. He should prepare dinner, something light, easy on her compromised system. Miso soup, maybe. Steamed vegetables. Things that whispered nourishment without demanding too much. As he moved into the kitchen, he tried to ignore the truth settling like sediment in his chest. In this house of marble and gold, surrounded by every luxury money could buy, she was dying of loneliness. And he, a man who'd been dead inside for years, was the only one who noticed. What happens when the people who are supposed to care for us can't, and the ones we never expected to become our lifeline? Drop a comment if you've ever felt invisible in a crowded room. The fever came in the darkest hours, that hollow space between midnight and dawn when the mansion felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Isabella woke to her body, betraying her once again. Heat radiated from her core like she'd swallowed the sun. Her sheets were soaked through, clinging to her skin with a cold-hot confusion that made her whimper. The room tilted sideways, then righted itself, then tilted again. She reached for the intercom button, but her hand wouldn't cooperate. Her fingers felt thick and useless, pawing at the nightstand like a child's. The water glass toppled. Crystal shattered against marble with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. Then, nothing but the fever and the fear and the desperate, animal understanding that she was alone, and something was very wrong. She didn't remember calling out. Didn't remember if she'd made any sound at all. But suddenly there was light from the hallway, footsteps, fast but controlled. And then Daniel was there, kneeling beside her bed in flannel pajama pants and a faded MIT t-shirt, his hair disheveled from sleep, his eyes sharp with immediate assessment. Isabella. Her name. Not Mrs. Ashford. Just her name, said with an urgency that cut through the fog. His hand went to her forehead, and she heard him curse softly. "You're burning up. How long have you felt like this?" I woke up and..." Her teeth were chattering despite the heat. Nothing made sense. Okay, it's all right." His voice was steady, an anchor in the chaos. He grabbed his phone from his pocket, dialed quickly. "Dr. Patel? It's Daniel Cross, from the Ashford residence. Mrs. Ashford has a fever. I'd estimate 103, possibly higher. Yes, she's conscious but disoriented. No, Mr. Ashford is in Singapore. Yes, I understand." He listened for a moment, his free hand moving to grip hers, warm, solid, real. She clung to it without thinking, without caring about propriety or boundaries or any of the invisible lines that separated her world from his. "Every 4 hours. Yes, I have those. Cooling measures, monitor for seizures. I understand. Yes, I'll call if anything changes." He ended the call and looked down at her, his expression caught between professional calm and something rawer, more vulnerable. "Dr. Patel says this can happen with your condition. Your immune system is compromised. We need to bring the fever down. I'm going to help you, all right? But I need you to trust me." I trust you. The words came out instinctively, bypassing every defense she'd carefully constructed. In that moment, delirious and afraid, she meant them completely. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, pain, something too complex to name. He moved with swift efficiency, disappearing into her bathroom and returning with towels and a basin of cool water. I'm going to need to change your sheets and your clothes. They're soaked through. Do you have something light you can wear? Isabella's face burned, though whether from fever or embarrassment, she couldn't tell. The dresser. Second drawer. There are, she gestured weakly. He found a silk nightgown, pale blue and simple. Then he turned his back, giving her privacy that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. Can you manage? She tried. Truly, she did. But her arms wouldn't lift, and the wet fabric clung to her like a second skin, and suddenly she was crying great, humiliating sobs that shook her already weakened frame. I can't, she gasped. I can't do this one simple thing. Hey, stop. Daniel turned back, crossing to her in 2 strides. He knelt so their eyes were level, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're not weak. You're sick. There's a difference. And you don't have to do this alone. Will you let me help you? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Close your eyes, he said softly. She did. His hands were careful, clinical, helping her sit up, easing the soaked nightgown over her head, replacing it with the dry one with the practiced ease of someone who understood both necessity and dignity. He never lingered, never made her feel exposed. Somehow, impossibly, he made her feel cared for. When she opened her eyes again, she was in fresh silk, and he was stripping the wet sheets with brisk efficiency, replacing them with clean ones from the linen closet. He worked quickly, and within minutes she was settled against fresh pillows, a light blanket pulled to her waist. Then came the cooling measures, a damp cloth against her forehead, her wrists behind her neck. He worked in silence, his touch gentle but sure, and Isabella found herself watching his face in the dim light. The concentration in his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows, the careful way he wrung excess water from the cloth so it wouldn't drip. You've done this before, she whispered. His hands stilled for just a moment. Yes. For who? The silence stretched. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my daughter. When she had pneumonia at 3. I sat up with her for 2 nights. His voice was rough, scraped raw. She was terrified of the fever dreams. I told her stories until my voice gave out. Isabella's heart clenched. Daniel. Medication time. He stood abruptly, moving to the tray he'd brought up, measuring out pills and liquid with shaking hands. He was retreating again, she realized, pulling back from the intimacy of shared pain. But she'd heard it. The past tense. Was had. She took the medications he offered, swallowing them with water he held steady for her. The cool liquid soothed her throat, but it couldn't touch the ache in her chest. The sudden, fierce desire to comfort this man who'd appeared in her darkest hour like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known to speak. Will you stay? The words escaped before she could stop them. Her hand found his wrist, circling it weakly. Please. I don't want to be alone. She watched him war with himself. Watched propriety battle something deeper, more human. Watched him lose. I'll stay. He pulled the upholstered chair from the corner, the expensive, decorative piece that had never been sat in, and positioned it beside her bed. Then he settled into it, his hand finding hers in the space between them. Tell me a story, she murmured, her eyes already growing heavy as the medication began its work. What kind of story? Any kind. Just your voice. I need to hear something real. So he did. He told her about teaching Victorian literature to undergraduates who thought Bronte was boring until they understood that Jane Eyre was about a woman demanding to be seen as an equal. About the semester he'd assigned his students to rewrite Pride and Prejudice from the servants' perspectives, and how it had changed their understanding of class and power. About the colleague who'd smuggled a kitten into the faculty office and blamed it on the dean. His voice was low, cultured, warm, nothing like the careful neutrality he usually employed. This was who he'd been before. This was the man hiding beneath the servant's uniform. Isabella listened, her thumb unconsciously stroking against his knuckles. The fever still raged, but it felt distant now, manageable. She wasn't alone in it. Wasn't fighting it in the terrible silence of abandonment. You were a professor, she said when he paused. Not a question. A recognition. Once. A lifetime ago. Why did you stop? His hand tightened around hers. Because I didn't deserve that life anymore. She wanted to ask why. Wanted to understand what had carved such deep guilt into this gentle man. But her body was surrendering to exhaustion, pulling her down into darkness. Daniel, I'm here. Don't leave me. Her voice was barely a whisper now, consciousness slipping away like sand through fingers. I won't. His other hand came up to brush damp hair from her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. I promise. Sleep now. She did, her hand still wrapped around his, tethering herself to the one solid thing in a world that had become untethered. Dawn came slowly, bleeding pale light through the curtains. Isabella woke to coolness. The fever had broken. Her nightgown was damp again, but with sweat this time, the healthy kind that meant her body had won a battle. She felt weak, wrung out, but clear-headed. And warm. Not from fever, but from the weight against her side. Daniel had moved from the chair at some point during the night. He'd sat on the edge of her bed, his upper body folded forward, his head resting on his arms near her hip. He'd fallen asleep like that, still holding her hand, unwilling to break the connection even in unconsciousness. His face was softer in sleep, younger somehow. The lines of grief and self-punishment smoothed away, revealing glimpses of who he might have been before loss carved him hollow. Isabella should have moved, should have woken him, restored the proper distance, pretended nothing had shifted in the fever-dark hours. Instead, she lay very still, barely breathing, and let herself have this moment of not being alone, of being held onto, of mattering enough that someone stayed. Her free hand moved almost of its own accord, fingers carefully brushing through his dark hair. Once, twice, a gesture of gratitude, and something far more dangerous. He stirred, consciousness returning in slow stages. She watched him remember where he was, confusion, then understanding, then something close to panic as he registered their positions. He sat up quickly, releasing her hand, putting distance between them. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I must have fallen asleep. That was inappropriate. You saved me. Her voice was hoarse but steady. You stayed when I asked. There's nothing inappropriate about showing up when someone needs you. Their eyes met, and the air in the room changed. Thickened. Became charged with something neither of them could name, but both recognized. She'd seen him last night, not the servant, but the man. The father who'd sat up through fevers. The professor who'd taught about demanding to be seen as equals. The person who carried grief like a second shadow, but still had enough light left to share. And he'd seen her, not the dying billionaire's wife, not the invalid in the gilded cage, but Isabella. Just Isabella. Afraid and vulnerable and human. Something had broken open in the darkness. Some wall that money and propriety, and their assigned roles had built between them. How do you feel? He asked finally, his voice carefully neutral even as his eyes betrayed him. Better. Because of you. The medication did most of the work. No. She held his gaze, refusing to let him diminish this. You did. You showed up. You stayed. You made me feel less alone. That's not nothing, Daniel. He flinched at his name on her lips, the second time she'd used it without the formal address. Mrs. Ashford. Isabella, she interrupted. When it's just us, call me Isabella. I shouldn't. Why not? Because. He stood, running a hand through his disheveled hair, looking lost in a way that made her chest ache. Because there are lines. Rules. You're my employer. Your husband. My husband, she said quietly, left me alone while my body attacks itself. My husband doesn't know my favorite cookie, or that I used to paint, or that I'm terrified of dying in this empty house. You know all of that. So please, don't tell me about lines when you're the only person who's crossed them enough to actually see me. The words hung in the morning light, true and terrible and impossible to take back. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the exact moment he stopped fighting whatever was happening between them. Saw surrender and wanton fear all tangled together in his expression. Isabella, he said finally. Her name sounded different in his voice. Like a prayer. Like a confession. Like the beginning of something that would change everything. She smiled, weak but genuine. Better. He returned it despite himself. Then, remembering his role, his responsibilities, he straightened. You should rest. I'll bring you breakfast. Something light. Will you eat with me? That's not. I'm asking. She met his eyes. Not as your employer. As someone who doesn't want to eat alone. Please. He wavered. She watched him calculate the risk, weigh the propriety, fight the same battle he'd fought last night. And lose again. Okay, he said softly. I'll make us both something. After he left, Isabella lay back against her pillows, her hands still warm from where he'd held it through the night. Her body ached, but something else entirely, something that had been frozen for years, was beginning impossibly to thaw. She remembered the weight of his head against her hip, the tenderness of his touch, the stories he'd told in the dark. Don't leave me, she'd begged. I won't, he'd promised. And he hadn't. For the first time since her diagnosis, Isabella felt something other than resignation. It fluttered in her chest like a bird testing damaged wings. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, necessary hope. The breakfast tray arrived 40 minutes later, carried by a Daniel who'd clearly tried to restore order. Showered, dressed in his usual pressed shirt and dark slacks, hair combed back, expression carefully neutral. But Isabella could see the cracks now. The way his hands weren't quite steady as he arranged the dishes. The way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. The way he positioned himself at the far end of the bed, maintaining distance that felt newly artificial. He'd retreated, built the walls back up, and something in her, something she hadn't known still existed, rebelled against it. I made miso soup, he said, his voice sliding back into the professional cadence. And some plain rice. Steamed vegetables. Nothing that will upset your stomach after last night. It smells wonderful. Thank you. She gestured to the empty space beside her on the bed. Sit. You said you'd eat with me. I shouldn't. You need your rest, and I have. There are duties I've neglected. The house doesn't run itself. The house can wait. Mrs. Ashford, you called me Isabella this morning. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, frustration bleeding through. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Pretending last night didn't happen. Pretending you didn't hold my hand for hours. Pretending we didn't. She stopped, unsure how to finish. Pretending we didn't see each other. Daniel set the tray on the dresser with deliberate care, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was tight. Last night was an emergency. You were ill. I did what was necessary. But it's morning now, and you're recovering, and we both need to remember what's appropriate. Appropriate. The word tasted bitter. Is it appropriate for my husband to abandon me? Is it appropriate that I've spent 6 months dying in this house with no one who actually cares if I wake up? Tell me, Daniel, what exactly are the rules of appropriate when my entire life has become a performance of pretending everything is fine? He turned then, and she saw the war in his face, the desire to close the distance warring with something that looked like fear. You're angry. Yes, I'm angry. Her voice cracked, and she hated the weakness in it, but she couldn't stop. I'm angry that I apologized to you yesterday for existing. I'm angry that the only person who's touched me with kindness in months is someone who thinks he needs to maintain professional distance while my body falls apart. I'm angry that you're standing across the room like I'm contagious when last night you... Her breath caught. She was crying now, hot tears of frustration and something deeper, something that had been building for months of careful isolation. When last night you made me feel human again, she finished quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. I can't. His voice was raw. I can't be what you need, Isabella. I'm not, I'm broken. I'm hiding here because I don't deserve anything real. And you, he gestured helplessly at her. You're vulnerable. You're lonely. Your husband is neglecting you in ways that should be criminal. But that doesn't mean I'm the answer. That doesn't mean whatever you think you felt last night was real. The words landed like blows. So that's what you think. Her voice was dangerously quiet. That I'm just some desperate, lonely invalid who's confused gratitude for connection? That I don't know my own mind? I think you're going through hell, and I think you deserve better than a man who's using servitude as penance. He finally met her eyes, and the pain in them stole her breath. I think you deserve someone who hasn't forgotten how to be whole. And that's not me. You don't get to decide what I deserve. Maybe not. But I get to decide what I'm capable of giving. And right now, that's making sure you eat breakfast and take your medication on time. That's what I can do. That's all I can do. He moved to the tray, prepared a bowl of soup with mechanical precision, and brought it to her bedside. Set it on the table within her reach. His movements were rigid, controlled, a man barely holding himself together. I'll check on you in 2 hours, he said without looking at her. If you need anything before then, use the intercom. He was almost to the door when she spoke. Why did you tell me about your daughter? His hand froze on the doorframe. Last night, When I asked who you'd cared for before, you could have said anything, could have deflected, but you told me the truth. You let me see that part of you." Her voice was steady now, clear. "So don't stand there and tell me you're broken beyond repair when you're still capable of that kind of honesty. Don't tell me what we shared wasn't real when you're running away from it, because you know exactly how real it was." Daniel's shoulders rose and fell with a breath that looked painful. When he turned back, his expression was carved from stone, beautiful and immovable and utterly closed off. "Emma was 3 when she got pneumonia," he said flatly. "I sat with her because her mother, my wife, was working a double shift at the hospital. Rachel was a nurse, good at her job, better at it than I was at mine some days." His laugh was bitter, hollow. 2 years later, we were driving home from Emma's kindergarten winter concert. She'd sung Jingle Bells off-key and wore a construction paper reindeer hat. It was snowing. I was tired. I'd been up late grading papers. Rachel offered to drive, but I said no. Said I was fine. Isabella's heart was breaking, but she didn't interrupt. Didn't move. Just let him speak. Black ice on Route 2. The car spun. I overcorrected. We went through the guardrail. His voice was mechanical now, reciting facts like a coroner's report. I woke up in the hospital with a concussion and 3 broken ribs. They were gone. Both of them. Gone because I was too stubborn and too tired and too stupid to let someone else take the wheel. Daniel. So yes, Isabella. I told you about my daughter because in that moment, watching you scared and sick, I forgot to keep that door locked. I forgot that I don't get to have moments like that anymore. I forgot that caring about someone, really caring, has consequences I'm not willing to risk again. He looked at her finally, and his eyes were devastated. "I can keep you safe. I can make sure you eat and take your medication and don't spend your nights alone and terrified. But I cannot let you care about me. I won't survive losing someone else." The admission hung between them, raw and true and impossibly sad. Isabella wanted to go to him, wanted to close the distance and hold him and tell him that loss and love were not the same thing, that he deserved forgiveness, that his daughter would hate knowing he'd turned himself into a ghost. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She was still weak, still tethered to this bed by illness and exhaustion. So she did the only thing she could. She spoke the truth. "I'm already dying," she said softly. "My kidneys are failing. The doctors give me maybe a year, probably less. So your fear of losing me? It's not a risk, Daniel. It's a guarantee. But that doesn't mean the time in between has to be spent hiding from each other." His face crumpled. "That's not fair. None of this is fair. Not what happened to your family. Not what's happening to my body. Not the fact that we found each other in the wreckage of our separate hells. But we did. And we can either pretend we didn't, or we can decide that connection, even temporary connection, is worth the cost of eventual loss. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I." She smiled sadly. "But I do know that last night, for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. And I hope, that maybe you weren't either." Daniel stood in the doorway, caught between flight and surrender, his entire body taut with the effort of holding himself back. "Eat your breakfast," he said finally, his voice wrecked. "Take your medication. Rest. Will you check on me in 2 hours? Yes. Will you call me Mrs. Ashford when you do?" The question was a challenge, a line drawn, a choice offered. "I don't know," he said honestly. Then he left, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Isabella stared at the cooling soup, at the carefully arranged tray, at the evidence of care that contradicted every word he'd just said. "I cannot let you care about me." Too late, she thought. Much too late. Downstairs, Daniel made it to his room before his legs gave out. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, head in his hands, and let himself shake. "I'm already dying." The words circled like vultures. She'd said them so calmly, as if she'd made peace with it. As if she was offering him permission to care about her with an expiration date already stamped on the relationship. He couldn't do it. Couldn't let himself fall for a woman who was slipping away even as he reached for her. Couldn't survive watching another person he cared about disappear. But God, he wanted to. Wanted to go back upstairs and sit with her while she ate. Wanted to tell her more stories. Wanted to sketch beside her while she painted. Wanted to learn what made her laugh. Wanted to memorize the way she said his name like it meant something. Wanted to be seen. Be real. Be more than the ghost he'd been for 4 years. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard Ashford. "Status update on Isabella?" Daniel stared at the message. Thought about the man who'd kissed his dying wife's forehead with all the warmth of a business transaction before flying to Singapore. The man who'd hired Daniel to handle everything else, as if his wife were a problem to be managed. He could quit. Should quit. Walk away before this became more complicated, more painful, more impossible. Instead, he typed back, *fever last night. Managed it. She's stable now, *. The response came immediately, *good. Keep me posted if anything critical happens. Busy with merger talks, *. If anything critical happens. As if his wife nearly burning up with fever wasn't critical. As if her loneliness, her fear, her slow disappearance weren't emergencies worth interrupting a business deal. Daniel deleted the message thread and stood. He had 2 hours before he'd promised to check on her. 2 hours to rebuild his defenses. 2 hours to remember all the reasons why distance was safer than connection. He spent them cleaning the already spotless kitchen with aggressive precision, trying not to think about the way Isabella had looked at him. Like he was more than his guilt. Like he was worth saving. Like she saw him the same way he'd started seeing her. Not as someone beyond help, but as someone worth fighting for. When Daniel knocked on Isabella's door exactly 2 hours later, his professional mask was firmly back in place. He entered to find her sitting up in bed, the breakfast tray empty, her sketch pad open on her lap. She was drawing. He froze. "I didn't know you were feeling well enough to. I needed to do something with my hands." She didn't look up, her pencil moving in confident strokes across the paper. "Something other than waiting for you to come back, so we could pretend to be strangers again." There was no heat in her voice, just resignation. It was somehow worse than her earlier anger. Daniel approached slowly, professional distance warring with curiosity. "May I see?" She flipped the pad around. It was him, sitting in the chair beside her bed, his head bowed, one hand reaching out into empty space. The drawing was rough, unfinished, but the emotion in it was devastating. Loneliness captured in graphite and shadow. "This is how I saw you last night," she said quietly. "Before you pulled away. Before you remembered you weren't allowed to care. Isabella, I'm not asking you to love me, Daniel." She met his eyes, and hers were clear, determined. "I'm not asking for forever or promises or anything you can't give. But I am asking you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass. Stop deciding what I can and can't handle. If we only have a year," her voice caught, but she pushed through. "If we only have months or weeks or days, then let them be honest. Let them be real. Please. What would you do if you had limited time? Would you choose safety or truth? Let us know in the comments. ***. Daniel looked at the drawing. At her. At the impossible choice she was offering. He thought about Emma's construction paper reindeer hat. About Rachel's laugh. About the way grief had turned him into a hollow man who went through motions instead of living. He thought about Isabella's hand in his through the fever-dark hours. About the way she'd said his name like it mattered. About the fact that she was right. She was already dying, and hiding from her wouldn't change that, would only make the time she had left lonelier than it needed to be. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Honest. Real." But he held up a hand before hope could fully bloom in her expression. "We do this carefully. I'm still employed here. Your husband will be back in 9 days. We can't. There are limits, Isabella. Boundaries that need to exist. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and something like fear making his voice rough. "I don't know how to be halfway in. I don't know how to care about someone at a distance. When I love, He stopped, hearing what he'd almost said. "You love completely," Isabella finished softly. "I know. I can see it in every careful thing you do. The way you remember the cookie I mentioned once. The way you arrange my pills. The way you held my hand all night, even though it must have been uncomfortable." Her smile was gentle, sad. "You're not capable of half measures, Daniel. Neither am I. So maybe we just see what happens. Take it one honest moment at a time. One honest moment at a time." It wasn't a solution. It wasn't safe. But it was something other than the slow death of isolation they'd both been enduring. "One moment at a time," he repeated. Then, before he could stop himself, "Did you eat?" "Yes. All of it. Most of it. That's not all of it. You sound like a professor grading homework." "I was a professor grading homework." The words came easier now, less like admission and more like truth. "My students used to complain I was pedantic about citations. Were you?" "Absolutely. If you're going to make an argument, support it properly. Isabella laughed, a real laugh, light and surprised. So what's your argument here? That I need to finish my vegetables. My argument is that your body needs nutrients to fight, and, he stopped, seeing the trap she'd set. You're making fun of me. A little. Is it working? Despite everything, the fear, the resistance, the walls he'd tried so hard to maintain, Daniel felt his mouth curve into a smile. Unfortunately, yes. Her expression softened. There you are. Here I am, he said quietly. They looked at each other across the space that felt simultaneously too far and dangerously close. The air between them hummed with possibility and risk and the tentative, terrifying beginning of something neither of them could name. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Your afternoon medication is in 3 hours. I'll bring it with lunch. Will you eat with me this time? Actually eat, not just watch me from across the room. He should say no. Should maintain some semblance of the boundaries he'd just insisted they needed. Instead, he said, yes. Good. Isabella settled back against her pillows, looking more content than he'd ever seen her. And Daniel, yes. Thank you. For staying last night. For coming back today. For being honest, even when it's hard. You're welcome, he said, and meant it in ways that terrified him. As he left her room, he felt the careful architecture of his self-punishment beginning to crack. For years of penance, of hiding, of refusing to let himself be human, all of it threatened by one dying woman who saw through his defenses and asked him to be real. The most dangerous part? He wanted to be. God help him, he wanted to be. The storm arrived on the third night of Richard's absence, rolling in from the coast with the kind of savage intensity that made meteorologists use words like unprecedented and historic. Isabella heard it before she saw it. Wind screaming against the windows like something alive and furious, rain drumming against the roof in percussive waves. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and died. The mansion plunged into darkness, so complete it felt solid. Her heart jumped. She reached instinctively for the lamp switch, clicking it uselessly. Reached for her phone, dead, forgotten on the charger. The monitors that usually blinked and hummed beside her bed had gone silent, their battery backups apparently expired or non-existent. Daniel. Her voice sounded small in the dark, swallowed by the storm's roar. The door opened, and there he was, silhouetted by the narrow beam of a flashlight, already moving toward her with that mixture of efficiency and care she'd come to recognize. I'm here. Are you all right? Yes, just startled. What happened? Transformer blew. The whole grid's down. I checked with the neighbors on the landline before that went too. He set the flashlight on her nightstand, angling it toward the ceiling so it cast ambient light. The backup generator isn't responding. I think it's the same issue we had last year. The fuel line freezes in extreme weather. I can try to fix it in the morning when there's light, but for now, we're stuck in the dark. More or less. He glanced at her monitors, concern creasing his forehead. How much charge do you have on your medical equipment? I don't know. They just stopped. She watched him move through the room, checking connections, feeling for battery packs in the darkness. His flashlight beam caught the tension in his shoulders, the focused set of his jaw. The 4-pump is out, he said finally. We can manage overnight without it. Your line is stable, and you're between doses anyway. But we have a bigger problem. What? Heat. The house is all electric, radiant floors, smart thermostats, everything controlled centrally. Without power, we've got maybe 4 hours before it starts getting cold. And with your compromised immune system. He didn't need to finish. Isabella pulled the cashmere throw tighter around her shoulders, already feeling the chill creeping in around the edges. What do we do? Daniel was quiet for a moment, calculating. Then, the living room has a gas fireplace, independent line, manual ignition. It's one of the few things in this house that doesn't require electricity. If I can get it lit, that room will stay warm. But I'm upstairs. Yes. He looked at her, then at the door, then back. Can you walk? If I help you. Isabella's pride wanted to say yes immediately. Her body, however, was more honest. She'd barely been out of bed in days, and even with assistance, navigating the dark stairs felt daunting. I think so, she said. If you're with me. Always. The words slipped out before he could stop it, raw and unguarded. He cleared his throat. I mean yes. I'll help you. Let me get some blankets and pillows first. Make the living room comfortable. He disappeared, returning minutes later with his arms full of bedding. Then came the careful process of getting her upright, his arm around her waist, solid and warm, her weight leaning heavily against his side. "Take your time," he murmured. "We're not in a rush." They weren't, but she could feel the cold already, sharper now, invasive. Her breath was starting to mist. The stairs were treacherous in the dark. Each step required negotiation, trust, the frightening surrender of letting someone else bear her weight. Daniel moved with patient precision, one step at a time, his grip never wavering. "You know," Isabella said halfway down, trying to keep her voice light, "this is probably the most excitement I've had in months. I'll add emergency evacuation during power outage to your activity log." His tone matched hers, gentle humor masking concern. "Your physical therapist will be thrilled." "What physical therapist?" "The one your husband should have hired." The observation landed quietly, but its implications rang loud. Another thing Richard hadn't thought to provide. Another way he'd left her care to chance and Daniel's initiative. They reached the living room, and Daniel settled her onto the leather sofa near the fireplace, a massive stone structure that dominated one wall. He built a nest of pillows around her, cocooned her in blankets until she was surrounded by softness. "Don't move," he instructed. "I'll get the fire going." She watched him work in the flashlight's glow, opening the flue, checking the gas line, using a long lighter to ignite the logs. The flames caught, spreading warmth and flickering orange light that pushed back the darkness. The transformation was immediate. The cold retreated. Shadows danced across walls hung with expensive art that had never been properly appreciated. The room, usually sterile and perfectly maintained, became something else entirely, intimate, sheltered, almost magical. Daniel returned to her, checking her temperature with the back of his hand against her forehead, a gesture that had become familiar these past days. "Better?" he asked. "Much. Thank you." He nodded, then moved to sit in the armchair across from her, maintaining distance even in crisis. "Don't," Isabella said. "Don't what?" "Sit over there like we're strangers. There's plenty of room here." She patted the sofa beside her. "And I'm cold enough that I could use the body heat." She watched him hesitate, watched the familiar war play across his features. But the cold was real, the danger was real, and practicality finally won. He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. She immediately shifted closer, erasing that space, and pulled the blanket over both of them. "Isabella, it's a storm, Daniel. We're trapped here together. Let's not pretend there's still a professional distance to maintain when I literally can't get up the stairs without your help." He exhaled slowly, and she felt his body finally relax against hers. "You're right. I know." She understood. This wasn't easy for either of them. This careful dance of breaking down walls while trying not to get hurt in the rubble. "One honest moment at a time, remember? One moment at a time," he repeated. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing light across their faces. They sat in silence for a while, shoulders touching, sharing warmth, watching flames consume wood and transform it into light. "Tell me about your daughter," Isabella said softly. "Not about losing her. About knowing her. What was she like?" Daniel stiffened, and she thought he might refuse. Might retreat into the safe distance of not talking about it. Instead, he surprised her. "She was fearless," he said, his voice rough with memory. "Completely, terrifyingly fearless. At 2, she tried to climb out of her crib to pet the neighbor's German shepherd through the window. At 4, she announced she was going to be an astronaut princess veterinarian because why should she have to choose?" Isabella smiled, seeing it. "She sounds wonderful." She was chaos in human form. "Rachel used to joke that Emma got all my stubborn determination and none of my caution." His laugh was soft, painful. She wasn't wrong. Emma would try anything once. Eat weird food, talk to strangers, demand to know how everything worked. She asked why about 17,000 times a day. "Did you answer?" "Every single time. Even when I was exhausted. Even when the answer was complicated. Rachel said I was raising a tiny philosopher." I think she was right. Daniel was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The night she sang Jingle Bells at her concert, the night we died, she was so proud. Wore that ridiculous construction paper, had all through dinner. Made us take 17 pictures. She fell asleep in the car still wearing it, humming off-key." His breath hitched. Isabella's hand found his beneath the blanket, lacing their fingers together. "I think she sounds like someone who lived very fully," Isabella said carefully. "Even if it wasn't for long enough." For years, 7 months, and 12 days. Daniel's thumb moved against her palm, a unconscious seeking of comfort. Not nearly long enough. No, it wasn't. She squeezed his hand. But Daniel, I don't think she'd want you punishing yourself by hiding from life. I think she'd want you to keep asking why. Keep trying things. Keep being the father who answered every question, even the hard ones. He turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting firelight and grief, and something that might have been hope. Is that what I'm doing? Hiding? Aren't you? Yes, he admitted. I thought if I made myself small enough, invisible enough, maybe it wouldn't hurt anymore. Maybe I could just exist without feeling. Did it work? For a while. Until, he stopped. Until what? His gaze held hers, intense and vulnerable. Until you asked me to stay. The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning. Isabella felt her pulse quicken, felt the air in the room shift and thicken. I'm glad I asked, she whispered. So am I, God help me, so am I. They were close now, closer than professional, closer than careful, close enough that she could count his eyelashes in the firelight, could feel his breath against her cheek. Daniel. Thunder cracked overhead, violent and immediate. The house shuddered. Something heavy crashed upstairs. A tree branch through a window, maybe, or furniture toppling. They both jumped, the spell broken. Daniel was on his feet immediately, flashlight in hand. Stay here. I need to check. No. Isabella's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Don't leave me alone. He looked down at her, seeing the fear she couldn't quite hide. Isabella, I need to see what? Please. Her voice cracked. I know it's irrational, but I can't, the dark, the storm, being alone. Please don't leave me here. She watched him war with himself, responsibility versus her need. Then he set the flashlight down and returned to the sofa, gathering her against his chest, his arms coming around her with a protectiveness that made her throat tight. Okay, he murmured into her hair. Okay, I won't leave. Whatever it is can wait until morning. Isabella pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in soap and cotton and something distinctly him. Her heart was racing, from the storm, from fear, from the impossible intimacy of being held like something precious. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not usually this. You're scared. You're allowed to be scared. His hand moved in slow circles on her back. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you told me instead of pretending you were fine. They settled back into the nest of blankets, but the configuration had changed. Now Isabella was tucked against Daniel's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her keeping her close and warm. It had crossed from necessary to intimate somewhere in the transition, and neither of them moved to correct it. The storm continued its assault. The fire burned, and they stayed exactly where they were. Tell me about you, Daniel said after a while. Before the illness. Before Richard. Who were you? Isabella hadn't talked about that version of herself in so long. Hadn't let herself remember the woman who'd existed before diagnosis, had redefined her entire identity. I was an art curator, she said slowly, at the Contemporary Museum downtown. I specialized in emerging artists, people no one had heard of yet, doing work that was raw and honest and sometimes technically imperfect, but emotionally true. That sounds perfect for you. It was. I loved it. Finding artists who had something real to say, helping them find audiences who would understand. There was this painter, Lucia Chun. She did these massive canvases of empty rooms. Just rooms, but they were so full of absence it made your chest ache. No one wanted to show her work. Too depressing, they said. Too dark. But you did. I gave her a whole wall. Prime location. Isabella smiled at the memory. Opening night, this elderly man stood in front of her largest piece, an empty kitchen, and just wept. Turned out his wife had died 6 months earlier, and he couldn't figure out how to explain what grief felt like. But there it was, on canvas. Lucia had painted it. What happened to her? To your job? The smile faded. I got sick. Started missing work for treatments. Then missing more work for complications. The museum was understanding, but eventually they needed someone who could actually show up. I resigned. Told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back when I recovered. But you didn't recover. No. And Richard, he was relieved, actually. Said it was stressful, my job. Said I should focus on getting well, that he made enough money for both of us. What he meant was that he preferred a wife who stayed home, who looked good at charity events and didn't have opinions about art that contradicted his friends' collections. Daniel's arm tightened around her. He's an idiot. He's a billionaire. They're not required to be smart about people, only money. Still an idiot. Daniel paused. Do you ever paint anymore? I've seen the supplies in your room. Sometimes. When I have the energy. Mostly I sketch. It takes less, she gestured vaguely. Less everything. Can I see? Your work. Isabella pulled back to look at him. Why? Because you saw me. The professor, the father, the person I used to be. I want to see you too. The curator. The artist. The woman who understood that technical imperfection could be emotionally perfect. Something in her chest cracked open. A wall she hadn't known was still standing. Tomorrow, she promised. When there's better light. I'll show you. I'll hold you to that. They fell quiet again, but it wasn't awkward. It was the comfortable silence of two people who'd moved past, needing to fill every moment with words. Isabella listened to Daniel's heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. Felt the rise and fall of his breathing. Let herself have this moment of not being alone, not being the sick wife or the dying woman, just being Isabella, held and warm and seen. Daniel. Thank you for not sitting across the room. His chest moved with quiet laughter. You didn't exactly give me a choice. I rarely do. Fair warning. Duly noted. Another silence, longer this time. The storm was beginning to ease, still raining, still dark, but the violence had passed. In its wake came a different kind of intensity, awareness of how closely they were pressed together, of lines crossed and boundaries dissolved. We should try to sleep, Daniel said, though he made no move to pull away. It's late. Will you stay? Here, on the sofa. Yes. No hesitation this time. I'll stay. Isabella shifted slightly, getting more comfortable, her hand resting over his heart. Daniel. Yes. I'm glad it's you. Here, in the dark, when everything else is falling apart. I'm glad it's you. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his chest. So am I. They drifted that way, not quite sleeping, not quite waking, suspended in the strange liminal space between crisis and comfort. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that transformed the familiar room into something new. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them felt alone. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the storm's aftermath. Isabella woke first, disoriented. The living room. The fireplace, now reduced to embers. And Daniel, still beside her, his arms still around her, his breathing deep and even with sleep. She should move. Should extract herself before this became even more complicated. Instead, she let herself have 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes of warmth and safety and the strange, fragile intimacy they'd built in the darkness. 5 more minutes of pretending this could be something other than temporary. Daniel stirred, consciousness returning gradually. His eyes opened, found hers, and for a moment, before memory and reality rushed back in, he simply smiled. Morning, he murmured, voice rough with sleep. Morning. They lay there, neither moving, neither willing to be the first to break the spell. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, everything had changed. I should check the generator, Daniel said finally, reluctantly. See about getting the power back on. And I should. Isabella gestured vaguely upward. Try to make it back to my room before the staff arrives and finds us like this. The staff has the week off. Your husband gave them paid leave while he's away. Daniel's expression darkened slightly. I think he assumed I could handle everything alone. You have been. Not alone. Not anymore. The words hung between them, simple and profound. Daniel helped her sit up, then carefully assisted her back upstairs. Slower now in daylight, both of them acutely aware of every point of contact, every moment of dependence. When they reached her room, he helped her back into bed, arranged pillows, checked her over with professional efficiency that couldn't quite hide the tenderness beneath it. I'll bring breakfast soon, he said, and see about the power. Try to rest. Daniel. He paused at the door. Last night, thank you. For staying close. For not making me be brave alone. His expression softened into something that made her chest ache. You were brave enough already. You just needed someone to be brave with. Then he was gone, leaving her in the gray morning light, wrapped in blankets that still smelled like smoke and something distinctly him. Isabella touched her fingers to her lips, feeling the ghost of how close they'd come to crossing yet another line in the darkness. When everything falls apart, do we find out who we really are, or who we've been hiding? Share your thoughts below. Soon, she thought. Soon there would be decisions to make, consequences to face, realities that couldn't be ignored. But for now, For this one morning, she let herself feel something other than dying. She let herself feel alive. The power came back on that afternoon, a mechanical click and hum that returned the mansion to its usual sterile efficiency. Lights blazed. Monitors beeped. The heating system purred back to life, erasing all evidence of the night they'd spent huddled by the fireplace. Isabella found herself oddly resentful of the restoration. The storm had stripped away pretense, forced proximity, created necessity. Now, with everything functioning normally, the reasons for closeness evaporated. Except they didn't. Not really. Daniel still brought her meals. Still sat with her while she ate, though now he chose the chair beside her bed rather than across the room. A small concession that felt monumental. Still asked about her day, her pain levels, whether she'd managed to sketch anything. Still looked at her like she was more than her diagnosis. 3 days after the storm, Isabella woke from an afternoon nap to find Daniel standing at her dresser, his back to her, holding something small in his hand. His shoulders were rigid, his entire body locked in a tension she'd never seen before. "Daniel," he startled, nearly dropping whatever he was holding. When he turned, his face was pale, his expression stricken. "I'm sorry. Your jewelry box fell. I was just putting things back, and He opened his palm, revealing a delicate silver bracelet. "Where did you get this?" Isabella blinked, confused by his intensity. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died." "Why?" Daniel's hand closed around the bracelet, knuckles white. "What's the inscription?" "It says Brave Heart in Latin. Cor Fortis." Daniel, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He sank into the chair beside her bed, as if his legs couldn't hold him. "Emma had one just like this. Identical. Rachel, my wife, she bought it for Emma's 4th birthday. Had the same inscription engraved inside." The room tilted. That's quite a coincidence," Isabella said carefully. "It's not a coincidence." Daniel's voice was hollow. "These bracelets were custom-made. There were only 2 of them. Rachel commissioned them from a jeweler in Boston. Her best friend from nursing school was a silversmith. She made one for Emma and one for the friend's daughter. They were supposed to wear them as a reminder to be brave." Isabella's heart was racing now, pieces of something enormous clicking into place. "Daniel, what was your wife's best friend's name?" "Catherine. Catherine Morrison." He looked up at her, his eyes desperate. "Why do you have Emma's bracelet, Isabella?" "It's not. I told you, it was my mother's. My mother was Catherine Ashford. She gave it to me when I was—" Isabella stopped, memory surfacing. "When I was 7. She said a friend had given it to her, told her to give it to me when I was old enough to understand what brave meant." Daniel stood abruptly, pacing. "Catherine Morrison. Are you telling me your mother was Catherine Morrison before she married?" "Yes. She grew up in Boston. She was Isabella's breath caught. "She was a silversmith. She made jewelry. Custom pieces. She died when I was 12. The silence that followed was deafening. "Emma died 4 years ago," Daniel said slowly, each word careful. "Catherine, your mother, died over a decade ago. How did this bracelet end up with you?" "I don't know. My mother never. She didn't talk much about her life before she married my father. They met when she was already sick, already dying. Cancer. She had maybe 2 years with him, most of it spent getting treatment that didn't work." Isabella reached for the bracelet. Daniel handed it to her with trembling fingers. "She gave this to me on her last good day. Said it was important. Said someday I'd understand." Daniel's face was working through calculations, chronology, impossible connections. Rachel and Catherine lost touch. It happened after. Rachel went to nursing school. Catherine stayed with her art. They drifted. But Rachel always talked about her. About the friend who understood what it meant to make beautiful things. "My mother talked about a Rachel too," Isabella said softly, memory flooding back. "Her friend from Boston. The one who was going to change the world by caring for people. She used to say," her voice cracked, "she used to say that Rachel had met someone wonderful. A professor who loved books almost as much as he loved her. She was so happy for her." Daniel made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "She talked about me?" "She said Rachel had found someone who saw her. Really saw her. Who asked questions and listened to answers and made her feel like her thoughts mattered." Isabella met his eyes. "She said that kind of love was rare. Worth fighting for." They stared at each other, the weight of connection, of cosmic, impossible coincidence, pressing down on them both. "Your mother made Emma's bracelet," Daniel said, as if saying it aloud might make it more real. She gave you the matching one. Somehow, across years and distance and death, you ended up here. With me. Wearing a reminder to be brave that was meant for a little girl who... He broke off, unable to finish. Isabella's eyes were wet. Who would have been around my age if she'd lived? Who your mother's best friend never got to meet because they lost touch before she was born. This isn't possible. But it is. It happened. Isabella looked at the bracelet in her palm. Silver worn smooth by years, inscription still clear. Cor Fortis. Brave heart. Daniel, what does this mean? I don't know. He sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. I don't know what this means. Coincidence? Fate? Some kind of cosmic joke? Or maybe, Isabella reached out, her hand finding his knee. Maybe it means we were supposed to find each other. That there are connections between people that transcend time and circumstance. That your daughter's courage and my mother's hope somehow led us to this moment. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. You sound like you believe in destiny. I don't know what I believe anymore. 6 months ago, I believed I'd grow old with Richard. I believed wealth meant security. I believed I had time. She held up the bracelet, light catching silver. Now I'm dying in a house that feels like a museum, and the only person who makes me feel alive is the man my mother's best friend married. The father of a little girl who wore the sister bracelet to mine. If that's not destiny, Daniel, then what is it? Impossible, he whispered. So is surviving a car accident that killed everyone you loved. So is living 4 years as a ghost. So is falling for your employer's wife while she's dying. Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. We're already living an impossible, Daniel. At least this impossible is beautiful. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the bracelet, then moving to circle her wrist just above it. Rachel would have loved you, he said roughly. She would have loved your stubbornness and your honesty and the way you refused to let me hide. I wish I could have known her. Known them both. Me too. Daniel's thumb traced patterns on her pulse point. Emma would have interrogated you. Would have demanded to know what paint you used, and why, and could she try, and did you know any astronauts, and... His voice broke. God, I miss her. I miss them both so much. I know. Isabella turned her hand, lacing their fingers together. And it's okay to miss them. It's okay to love them and grieve them, and still be here. Still be alive. Still want connection. Is it? Because most days it feels like betrayal. It's not betrayal to keep living, Daniel. It's honoring them. Your daughter who was fearless, your wife who cared so fiercely. Do you think they'd want you to disappear? To punish yourself by refusing joy? I don't know if I remember how to feel joy. Isabella squeezed his hand. Then we'll figure it out together. One honest moment at a time. Starting with this one. Daniel studied their joined hands, the bracelet between them like a blessing or a burden or both. This changes things. Does it? It feels like permission. Like Catherine and Rachel somehow orchestrated this from wherever they are, pushing us together. Like we're supposed to. He stopped, the words too big, too frightening. Like we're supposed to let ourselves feel, Isabella finished. Like we're supposed to stop fighting what's already happening. And what's happening, Isabella? She met his gaze, unflinching. I'm falling for you. Despite every logical reason not to. Despite the fact that I'm dying and you're grieving, and this entire situation is ethically complicated at best. I'm falling for you, and I don't know how to stop. The admission hung in the air, naked and true. Daniel's expression crumbled and reformed into something raw and desperate. I'm falling for you too. I've been falling since you grabbed my hand in the darkness and asked me not to leave. Maybe before. Maybe the first time you apologized for existing, and I wanted to show you all the ways you matter. Daniel. But I'm terrified, Isabella. I'm terrified of losing you. Of caring this much and having it ripped away again. Of surviving another person I love disappearing. I can't promise I won't disappear, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I wish I could, but we both know that's not a promise I can make. My body is failing. That's the truth we're living with. But I can promise. She brought his hand to her lips, pressed a kiss to his knuckles. I can promise that however much time I have left, I want to spend it being real with you. No more pretending. No more hiding. Just us, being honest and afraid and brave together. Cor Fortis, he murmured, touching the bracelet again. Brave heart, she translated. They sat in the afternoon light, hands clasped, bracelet gleaming between them like a tether to people long gone and love not yet fully acknowledged. Tell me about her, Daniel said finally. Your mother. I want to know the woman who made something so beautiful it survived long enough to bring us together." So Isabella did. She told him about Catherine Morrison Ashford, who'd made jewelry in a tiny studio above a bakery in Boston, who'd met Isabella's father in that bakery, both of them reaching for the last chocolate croissant, both apologizing, both laughing, who'd been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 3 months into their marriage, but married him anyway because she refused to let fear stop her from loving fully. "She used to say that time was a lie we told ourselves to feel safe," Isabella said. "That the only thing that mattered was intensity, not duration. She lived more in her last 2 years than most people do in 80. She sounds extraordinary. She was. She taught me to paint. Taught me to look at things until I really saw them, not just glanced. Taught me that imperfection was where the truth lived." Isabella smiled through tears. And apparently, she made matching bracelets for 2 little girls who never met, but whose fathers would find each other decades later. Even dying, she was still making connections. Daniel was crying now too, silently, tears tracking down his face. "I wish I could thank her." "You are thanking her. By being here. By seeing me. By letting yourself feel again." Isabella reached up, wiping his tears with her thumb. This is what she wanted when she made these bracelets. Bravery. Connection. The courage to love even when it's terrifying. It is terrifying. I know. But we're doing it anyway. Daniel leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. They breathed together, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, could taste the salt of their shared tears. "What do we do now?" he whispered. "Now." Isabella pulled back, just enough to see his face. "Now we stop pretending this is just caregiving. Stop pretending there are professional boundaries that haven't already been demolished. We admit what this is and decide what we want to do about it. Your husband is in Singapore caring more about a merger than his dying wife. Is not part of this conversation. This is about you and me, Daniel. What do you want?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the moment he stopped fighting. "I want you," he said simply. "However long we have. Whatever form it takes. I want to know you. Really know you. I want to see your paintings and learn what makes you laugh, and spend whatever time you have left making sure you know you're not invisible. You're not forgotten. You're not alone." Isabella's breath caught. "That's all I want too. Then we do this." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheekbone. "We stop hiding. We be honest. We're brave. Cor fortis," she whispered. "Brave heart," he agreed. And then, finally, inevitably, he kissed her. It was soft, gentle, reverent, a kiss that tasted like tears and truth, and the terrifying beauty of choosing connection despite every reason not to. A kiss that felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff simultaneously. When they pulled apart, both were shaking. "I haven't," Daniel's voice was rough. "Since Rachel, I haven't." "I know. Me neither. Not really. Not like this." Isabella pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his racing heart. "We'll figure it out together." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt 4 years of grief and 6 months of loneliness and a lifetime of being invisible burn away in the heat of being truly, finally seen. When the kiss ended, Daniel gathered her into his arms, and she went willingly, curling against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady. "Your mother was right," he murmured into her hair. "Intensity matters more than duration. Then let's make whatever time we have as intense as possible. Deal." They stayed like that until the room grew dark, wrapped around each other, the bracelet pressed between their joined hands. A promise from the past that the future was worth being brave for, no matter how brief it might be. Outside Isabella's door, the mansion continued its silent operation. Downstairs, dinner went unprepared. Medications were delayed. Schedules were abandoned. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them cared about anything except the person they were holding. The days that followed existed in a strange, suspended reality, as if the storm had torn a hole in the fabric of their carefully constructed lives, and they'd simply stepped through into something entirely new. Daniel no longer knocked before entering her room. Isabella no longer pretended she didn't watch the door waiting for him. The lines they'd drawn and redrawn and drawn again had finally been erased, and in their absence came an ease that felt both natural and miraculous. They ate together in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, the morning light painting everything gold. When she struggled with the toast, her hands weren't cooperating today, trembling slightly from medication. He simply took it from her and held it so she could bite, the gesture so natural it didn't feel like assistance. It felt like partnership. "Tell me something," Isabella said between bites. "Something you've never told anyone else." Daniel considered, chewing thoughtfully. "I used to write poetry. Before I became a professor. Terrible, overwrought poetry about love and death and the meaning of existence. I want to read it." "Absolutely not. It's buried in a box somewhere, and that's where it's staying." But he was smiling. "Your turn. Tell me something no one knows." Isabella looked down at her plate. "I'm not scared of dying. I'm scared of disappearing, of leaving nothing behind, of being forgotten." The admission cost her something. She felt Daniel still beside her, felt the weight of her words settle. "You won't be forgotten," he said quietly. "I won't let you be. You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." He set their plates aside and turned to face her fully. "Because you've already changed me. Already made me remember what it feels like to be alive. That doesn't disappear when you—" He stopped, unable to say it. "That stays. You stay." Isabella's eyes burned. "Daniel, show me your paintings," he said suddenly. "You promised. I want to see what you create when you're being brave." She hesitated. Her art was the most vulnerable part of her, the place where all her fear and hope and grief lived in color and shadow. But hadn't they agreed? No more hiding. "Okay," she said, "but help me to the studio first. I can't make it alone." The studio was what had once been Richard's home office, converted when Isabella got too sick to leave the house regularly. North-facing windows provided perfect light. Canvases leaned against walls in various states of completion. Paint-stained drop cloths covered expensive carpet that Richard had complained about but ultimately allowed because it kept her occupied, kept her out of his way. Daniel helped her into the chair by the easel, then stood back, taking in the space. She watched him move through it, studying each piece with the focused attention of someone who actually cared what they revealed. Most of the paintings were abstract, color fields that bled into each other, shapes that suggested emotion without defining it. But there was one series, tucked in the corner, that was different. Daniel found them. "These," he said, pulling out the first canvas. "What are these?" They were portraits. Empty chairs, unmade beds, dinner tables set for one. Spaces where people should have been but weren't. "Loneliness," Isabella said simply. "I started them after Richard stopped coming to bed. After I realized I was living with someone, but still utterly alone." Daniel studied the paintings with an intensity that made her chest tight. "They're extraordinary." "There, God, Isabella, these are what you told me about. The painter you championed. Lucia Chun. The empty rooms full of absence. I learned from the best." "No." He set the canvas down carefully and came to kneel beside her chair. "You didn't learn this. You lived it. And you turned it into something." He gestured helplessly. "Something that makes people feel less alone in their loneliness. That's not technique, Isabella. That's gift." She'd forgotten. In the months of being sick, of being defined by her diagnosis, she'd forgotten that she was good at this. That she had something to offer beyond being a problem to be managed. "Paint me something," Daniel said suddenly. "What?" "Paint me. Or paint us. Or paint, I don't know. Something new. Something that's not loneliness." "Daniel, I can barely hold a brush for more than 20 minutes before my hands. Then paint for 20 minutes. Or 10. Or 5. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for a masterpiece. I'm asking you to create something while I'm here to watch. To witness. To see you doing what you love." The request was so earnest, so devoid of pity, that Isabella found herself nodding. He helped her set up, new canvas, fresh palette, brushes within easy reach. Then he settled on the floor beside her chair, close enough to touch but not crowding, and simply watched. Isabella's hands shook as she mixed colors. Cerulean blue, burnt sienna, titanium white. The familiar ritual steadied her, muscle memory taking over where strength failed. She painted connection. Two figures, barely defined, more suggestion than form, their edges bleeding into each other, boundaries dissolving. Not lonely spaces, but shared ones. Not absence, but presence. Daniel watched in silence, his hand resting lightly on her ankle, an anchor, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. 15 minutes in, her hands began to cramp. She set the brush down with a frustrated sound. "It's not finished." "It's perfect anyway," Daniel said, standing to look at it properly. "Is that us?" "Maybe. I don't know. It's what we feel like in my head. Like we're bleeding into each other. Like I don't know where I end and you begin anymore. He kissed the top of her head. I feel that too. They stood there, his arms around her from behind, both of them looking at the painting, and Isabella felt something unlock in her chest. Permission. To create imperfectly. To be seen in process, not just in product. To matter even when she couldn't finish what she started. Come on, Daniel said. You're exhausted. Let's get you back to bed. But instead of leading her to the bedroom, he surprised her by taking her to the living room, to the couch where they'd weathered the storm. I want to read to you, he said. If that's okay. Something I think you'd like. He settled her among pillows, then disappeared to his quarters, returning with a worn paperback, Jane Eyre star. Your favorite, Isabella said, remembering his story about teaching it. One of them. I want to share it with you. He sat beside her, pulling her against his side, opening the book to a page he clearly knew by heart. This is the part where Jane tells Rochester she's leaving, where she demands to be seen as his equal. His voice was perfect for reading, cultured, expressive, alive with emotion. Isabella closed her eyes and let the words wash over her. Let Charlotte Bronte's fierce heroine demand what she deserved: recognition, respect, love on equal terms. Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. Daniel's voice caught on the words, and Isabella understood why. This was what they were doing, wasn't it? Demanding to be seen as equals despite every circumstance that said they shouldn't be. Despite class and employment and terminal illness and grief. When he finished the chapter, he closed the book and just held her. Thank you, Isabella whispered. For what? For reading to me. For watching me paint. For seeing me as more than my diagnosis. Her voice cracked. For making me remember who I was before I got sick. You're still her, Isabella. You're still the curator who championed imperfect art. Still the woman who turns loneliness into beauty. Illness didn't erase you. It just made you focus on surviving. But you're more than survival. She turned to look up at him. So are you. You're more than grief and penance. We're both more than the worst things that happen to us. Yes, we are. He kissed her then, slow and deep and filled with something that felt dangerously close to love. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I want to take you somewhere, Daniel said suddenly. If you're feeling strong enough. Where? It's a surprise, but I promise it's worth it. 20 minutes later, wrapped in blankets despite the warm day, Isabella found herself in the passenger seat of Daniel's old Volvo, a car she'd never seen before, kept parked in the garage's far corner because Richard's Bentley and Mercedes and Tesla took up the prominent spaces. Where are we going? She asked as they wound down tree-lined roads away from the mansion's isolation. You'll see. They drove for 30 minutes, Daniel's hand finding hers across the console, until they pulled up to a small gallery tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore in a neighborhood Isabella vaguely recognized. The Morrison Gallery, she read from the sign, her breath catching. Your mother's gallery, Daniel confirmed. She ran it before she got sick. Your father kept it open for years after she died, as a tribute. I looked it up. It's still here. Still showing the kind of work she loved. Emerging artists, emotional truth over technical perfection. Isabella stared at the storefront, emotions too complex to name surging through her. I haven't been here since the funeral. I couldn't. It hurt too much. We don't have to go in. I thought maybe you'd want to see it. To remember that her legacy didn't disappear. That what she built still matters. Isabella looked at Daniel, at this man who'd thought to research her mother's gallery, who'd driven her here, who understood that sometimes healing meant facing the places that hurt. Come with me? She asked. Always. Inside, the gallery was exactly as she remembered. White walls, perfect lighting, art that made you feel before you thought. The current exhibition was a series of photographs. Ordinary people in ordinary moments, but shot with such intimacy they became extraordinary. An elderly couple holding hands on a bench. A child teaching their grandmother to use a smartphone. A nurse tending to a patient with such gentleness it made Isabella's throat tight. Connection, Daniel murmured beside her. The whole exhibition is about connection. They moved through the space slowly, Isabella leaning on Daniel's arm, both of them studying each piece. At the end of the gallery was a small plaque, in memory of Catherine Morrison Ashford, who taught us that the most important art is the art of truly seeing each other. Isabella's breath hitched. I didn't know this was here. Your father must have had it installed. She traced the letters of her mother's name, feeling the weight of legacy and loss and love all tangled together. She would have liked this exhibition. She would have. And she'd be proud of you. For creating even when it's hard. For choosing connection over isolation. For being brave. Cor Fortis, Isabella thought, touching the bracelet on her wrist. They left the gallery hand in hand, but before they reached the car, Daniel steered her toward the coffee shop next door. One more thing, he said. I promise this is the last surprise today. He ordered them both drinks, her usual chamomile tea, which he somehow knew, and a coffee for himself, and led her to a corner table where the afternoon light streamed through the windows just right. When I was teaching, Daniel said, settling across from her, I used to come to coffee shops between classes, to grade papers and people watch and remember that there was life outside academia. Did you have a regular spot? In Boston, yes. A place called The Grind. Terrible pun, great coffee. I'd sit for hours sometimes, reading or writing or just existing in public. Not talking to anyone, just being around people. Being part of the world. You miss it. I do. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. Like I had a purpose beyond survival. He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. But being here with you, it's the first time in 4 years I've felt like I could have that again. Not the same life, but a life. A real one. Isabella squeezed his hand. You're giving that to me too. The feeling that I'm more than my diagnosis. That I still have things to offer. That my life isn't over just because it's shorter than I planned. It's not over, Daniel said fiercely. We're going to fill whatever time you have with moments like this. Real moments. Beautiful moments. We're going to go to galleries and coffee shops and anywhere else you want. We're going to read and paint and talk and be outrageously, completely alive together. Promise. Promise. They sat in the coffee shop until the light shifted golden, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel told her about his favorite students, the ones who'd really understood the books, who'd written essays that made him remember why he loved literature. Isabella told him about artists she'd discovered, the thrill of seeing someone's work and knowing the world needed to see it too. They talked about their mothers, Catherine and Rachel, best friends who'd drifted, but whose love had somehow brought their children together across impossible distance. They talked about fear and hope and the strange courage it took to choose connection when loss was guaranteed. And for the first time in months, for Isabella, and years for Daniel, they both felt completely, utterly, presently alive. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be happy, even when we know it's temporary. What's one moment of pure joy you're grateful for? Tell us below. ***. When they finally returned to the mansion, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Daniel helped Isabella back to her room, both of them moving slowly, reluctant to let the day end. He helped her change into comfortable clothes, brought her evening medications, arranged pillows the way she liked. But when he moved to leave, she caught his hand. "Stay," she said. "Not in the chair. Here. With me." He hesitated only a moment before kicking off his shoes and climbing into bed beside her. She curled against his chest, his arms coming around her automatically, perfectly. "Thank you for today," she murmured against his shirt. "For the gallery. For the coffee shop. For reminding me what it feels like to be part of the world. Thank you for letting me be part of yours." They lay in the gathering darkness, neither speaking, just breathing together. Outside, the mansion's expensive automated systems cycled through their programmed routines. Inside this room, two people who'd been lost found each other and held on. "Daniel." Isabella's voice was drowsy, sleep pulling her under. I think I'm falling in love with you." She felt him still, felt his heart rate spike beneath her palm. But Richard wasn't supposed to be back for 3 more days. Isabella grabbed her phone from the nightstand, hands shaking. 6:47 a.m. She could hear footsteps on the stairs now, heavy, purposeful, Richard's distinctive gait. Her door opened without a knock. "You're awake. Good." Richard stood in the doorway in his travel clothes, tie loosened, carry-on in hand. He looked exhausted but wired, the way he always did after closing a deal. The Singapore merger collapsed. Harrison's CEO got cold feet at the last minute. "I caught a red-eye back. I'm sorry. I know how much work you put into. It's fine. We'll restructure the approach." He set his bag down with a thud. "How have you been? Any complications while I was gone?" The question was perfunctory, asked the way one might ask about a houseplant's condition. "I had a fever. A few nights ago. But it passed." Daniel managed it well. Something flickered across Richard's face at Daniel's name. Where is he? I called for him downstairs, but got no response. He's probably, I don't know. The kitchen, maybe? Preparing breakfast. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in details Isabella suddenly realized were visible. The rumpled sheets on both sides of the bed, the pillow that still held the impression of Daniel's head, the way she was wearing one of Daniel's old MIT t-shirts instead of her own nightgown because it was softer and smelled like him. I'll find him, Richard said shortly. Get dressed. Dr. Patel is coming this afternoon for your checkup. I want a full report on your condition. He left, pulling the door closed with more force than necessary. Isabella's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone, texting Daniel quickly. Richard's home early. Be careful. The response came immediately. I know. I heard him arrive. Stay in your room. But staying in her room meant she couldn't hear what was happening downstairs. Couldn't intervene if Richard started asking the wrong questions. Couldn't protect Daniel from whatever suspicions were clearly forming in her husband's mind. She forced herself out of bed, moving slowly to the bathroom to change. Her reflection in the mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Cheeks slightly flushed, eyes bright, an expression that looked almost like contentment despite the fear currently flooding her system. She looked like a woman who'd been happy. That was dangerous. By the time she made it downstairs, moving carefully, one hand on the railing, she could hear Richard's voice coming from the kitchen, cold, clipped, interrogating. Explain to me why my wife's medication schedule has been irregular. It hasn't been irregular. Daniel's voice was professionally neutral, but Isabella could hear the tension underneath. She's taken every dose on time. I have detailed logs if you'd like to review them. What I'd like is to understand why I'm paying you to maintain household operations, yet I return to find. Richard paused. Tell me, Daniel, where were you this morning when I arrived? I was in my quarters. I'd just woken up. Really? Because I checked your quarters. Your bed hadn't been slept in. The silence that followed was suffocating. Isabella forced herself to move faster, rounding the corner into the kitchen. Both men turned to look at her. Daniel's face carefully blank, Richard's expression dangerously cold. Richard, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel was with me. I had a difficult night. He stayed nearby in case I needed assistance. Nearby. Richard's eyes moved between them, calculating. In the chair by your bed, I assume? Yes. Then why is there an indentation on both sides of your bed, Isabella? Why are the sheets rumpled as if two people slept there? Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I toss and turn. You know I do. The fever left me restless. And the shirt you're wearing? The one that's 3 sizes too large and has MIT printed across it. Richard's voice was getting colder, sharper. Did you buy that for yourself, or, he turned to Daniel. That's your shirt, isn't it? Daniel's jaw tightened. Mr. Ashford. Don't. Richard held up a hand. Don't insult my intelligence by lying. I can see it in both your faces. The way you're looking at each other. The way she's terrified and you're, what? Protective? Territorial. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. How long has this been going on? Nothing is going on, Isabella said, but her voice betrayed her, cracking on the words. Nothing? You're wearing his shirt, Isabella. There are signs of him sleeping in your bed. And when I arrived, do you know what I saw? His car. Still warm. Engine ticking. He'd just returned from somewhere. At dawn. With you, I assume. The coffee shop. The gallery. The beautiful, perfect day that now felt like evidence in a trial. We went to my mother's gallery, Isabella said quietly. I haven't been there in years. Daniel thought. He thought it would help. That's all. That's all. Richard's face was red now, anger overtaking the cold calculation. My dying wife and our servant went on a date to an art gallery, and I'm supposed to believe that's all? That you haven't been? He stopped, words failing him in the face of his rage. Jesus Christ, Isabella. I left you alone for 10 days. You left me alone long before that, she shot back, her own anger finally surfacing. You left me alone the day I got diagnosed. You left me alone every time you chose a business deal over sitting with me through treatment. You left me alone in this house to die while you pretended everything was fine as long as the staff handled it. So this is my fault. I work 70-hour weeks to maintain the lifestyle you enjoy. I don't enjoy it. I hate it. I hate this house and this life, and the way you look at me like I'm a problem to be managed instead of a person. Her voice was rising, months of suppressed resentment pouring out. Daniel didn't seduce me, Richard. He just showed up. He stayed when I was scared. He made me feel human again. That's all. That's everything." Richard's expression twisted into something ugly. "He's staff, Isabella. Hired help. You've confused gratitude for, what? Love. He's been taking advantage of your vulnerability. Don't." Daniel's voice cut through, sharp and dangerous. "Don't talk about her like she's incapable of making her own decisions. Don't talk about her like she's a child or an invalid. She knows her own mind better than you ever have." Richard turned on him, eyes blazing. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house." "No." Isabella moved forward, positioning herself between them despite her weakness. "You can't fire him. I can and I am. He's violated every professional boundary. He's taken advantage of you while you're sick and isolated. He loves me." The words burst out of her, true and desperate. "He loves me, and I love him, and for the first time in months I don't feel like I'm just waiting to die. So yes, Richard, I wore his shirt. Yes, he slept in my bed. Yes, we went to a gallery together. Because he sees me as a person worth caring about, and you," her voice broke. "You see me as an inconvenience." The silence that followed was apocalyptic. Richard stared at her like she was a stranger. "You love him?" "Yes. You're having an affair with our servant while living under my roof, spending my money, sleeping in a bed I paid for." "I'm dying, Richard." The words came out as a scream, raw and primal. "I'm dying, and I've spent the last 6 months doing it alone because you couldn't be bothered to care. So yes, when someone finally showed up, when someone finally treated me like I mattered, I let myself feel something other than abandoned. I'm sorry if that offends your sense of propriety, but I'm not sorry for choosing to be happy for whatever time I have left." Richard's face had gone pale. "You think this is about propriety? You've made a fool of me, Isabella. My wife and the help. It's pathetic." "What's pathetic?" Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. "Is a man who has a woman like Isabella and treats her like she's disposable. What's pathetic is leaving her alone through the worst crisis of her life. What's pathetic is coming home and being more concerned about your reputation than her well-being. You don't get to talk to me about my wife. She's not your wife anymore. Not in any way that matters. She's just a woman you married for the right connections and keep around because divorce would be complicated. But you don't love her. You don't even like her. So don't stand there and pretend this is about protecting her when it's really about protecting your ego." Richard moved fast, faster than Isabella expected. His hand shot out, grabbing Daniel by the collar, slamming him back against the counter. "You smug bastard. You think you know me? Know us. You're nothing. A servant who couldn't even keep his own family alive. Yes, I looked into your background when I hired you. I know all about the accident, about your dead wife and daughter, about how you ran away and hid in my house because you were too broken to live a real life." Daniel's face went white. "Richard, stop." Isabella tried to push between them, but she didn't have the strength. "Stop it. Is that what this is?" Richard continued, his voice venomous. "Some kind of replacement family fantasy. Latching onto my dying wife because you couldn't save your own? That's sick, Daniel. That's—" Daniel snapped. His fist connected with Richard's jaw with a crack that echoed through the kitchen. Richard staggered back, hand flying to his face, blood trickling from his split lip. "Get out," Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police." "Richard, please." Isabella was crying now, great heaving sobs. "Please don't do this. I need him. You need medical care and psychiatric help, apparently. Dr. Patel can recommend someone." Richard straightened, touching his bleeding lip with disgust. "Daniel, I'm giving you 60 seconds to leave this property. If you're not gone, I'm having you arrested for assault." Daniel looked at Isabella, his expression devastated. "Isabella, don't leave me," she whispered, the same words she'd said in the fever-dark hours. "Please don't leave me." His face crumpled. "I have to. If I stay, he'll have me arrested. I won't be able to help you from a jail cell. Then take me with you." "You can't, your medical equipment, your treatments." "I don't care." She was hysterical now, barely able to breathe through the tears. "I don't care about any of it. I just need you. Please, please don't leave me alone here." Daniel crossed to her, taking her face in his hands, memorizing her features like he'd never see them again. "I love you. I love you so much. But I can't take you from the medical care you need. I can't be responsible for." His voice broke. I can't lose you faster because I took you away from what keeps you alive. I'm already losing you. No. No, you're not. I'll figure something out. I'll find a way. I promise. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, desperate, goodbye kisses that tasted like salt and grief. I promise, Isabella. This isn't over. 30 seconds, Richard said coldly. Daniel pulled away, backing toward the door, his eyes never leaving Isabella's. She reached for him, but her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She was sliding down, collapsing, and Daniel caught her one last time, lowering her gently to the floor. I love you, he said again. Remember that. No matter what happens. I love you. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, and Isabella was left sobbing on the cold kitchen floor while her husband stood over her with blood on his lip and ice in his eyes. Get up, Richard said. Stop being dramatic and get up. But she couldn't. Her body wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't move, wouldn't do anything except shake with the force of her grief. She heard Richard make a call. Dr. Patel, come immediately. Isabella's having some kind of breakdown. His voice clinical, detached, like she was a malfunctioning appliance that needed repair. She heard him pacing, muttering about lawyers and NDAs and damage control. She heard everything except the one thing she needed to hear. Daniel's voice telling her it would be okay. Instead, there was only silence. The terrible, suffocating silence of being alone again in a house that felt like a tomb. Outside, Daniel's car started, the engine sound fading as he drove away, taking her heart with him. And Isabella lay on the kitchen floor in her husband's house, wearing Daniel's shirt, and understood with devastating clarity what it meant to have found love just in time to lose it. Dr. Patel arrived within the hour, finding Isabella exactly where Richard had left her, curled on the kitchen floor, trembling, unable or unwilling to move. The doctor's face creased with concern as she knelt beside her patient, checking vitals with gentle efficiency, while Richard stood in the doorway explaining the situation in terms that made Isabella sound unhinged. She's been emotionally unstable. Became attached to one of the staff members. I had to terminate his employment, and she, as you can see, didn't take it well. Dr. Patel's eyes flickered with something that might have been understanding, or pity, or both. Mr. Ashford, could you give us a moment alone? I don't think. Please. The doctor's tone left no room for argument. Patient privacy. Richard left, radiating disapproval. Isabella, Dr. Patel said softly, helping her into a sitting position against the cabinet. Can you tell me what happened? The truth, not his version. I fell in love, Isabella whispered, her voice wrecked. And he sent him away. Daniel, your caretaker. He's not my caretaker. He was, she couldn't finish. Couldn't find words for what Daniel had become. He made me want to live. And now he's gone. Dr. Patel was quiet for a long moment. Your vitals are stable physically. But Isabella, you need to hear something, and I need you to really listen. Can you do that? Isabella nodded numbly. Your kidney function has declined significantly in the past month. We're approaching the point where dialysis will become necessary, possibly within weeks. Your husband has the resources to provide the absolute best care. Home dialysis equipment, private nursing, anything you need. But that level of care requires stability. It requires me to be obedient, Isabella finished bitterly. To stay in my gilded cage and die quietly. It requires you to be realistic about what your body needs to survive. Dr. Patel's expression was compassionate but firm. I can't tell you how to live your life, Isabella. That's not my job. But I can tell you that the stress you're experiencing right now, the emotional turmoil, it's not helping your condition. Your blood pressure is elevated. Your heart rate is erratic. If this continues, we're looking at a crisis situation. So what do you suggest? That I pretend I'm not in love? That I pretend my husband hasn't been emotionally absent for months? That I just what? Accept being alone. I suggest you think very carefully about what you want your remaining time to look like. And then you make a choice. Dr. Patel stood, offering her hand to help Isabella up. But you need to make it with clear eyes, understanding the consequences. After the doctor left, prescribing sedatives Isabella had no intention of taking, Richard summoned her to his office. She went, because refusal would require energy she didn't have, and found him behind his massive desk, ice pack pressed to his jaw, looking every inch the wounded party. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Isabella remained standing. A small rebellion, but hers. Richard sighed. I've spoken with my lawyers. Given this situation, A divorce right now would be complicated, potentially embarrassing for both of us. So I'm proposing an alternative. I'm listening. You stay. We maintain appearances. I increase your medical care, private nurses, better equipment, whatever you need. In exchange, you agree that what happened with Daniel was an aberration, a side effect of your illness and isolation. You sign an NDA regarding his employment here, and we move forward as if none of this happened. Isabella stared at him. You want me to pretend I didn't fall in love. I want you to acknowledge that what you felt was a response to circumstance, not reality. You were vulnerable. He was available. It's a common phenomenon, patients developing attachments to caregivers. It doesn't mean it was real. It was real to me. Then you need to ask yourself, is it real enough to die for? Richard leaned forward, his expression calculating. Because that's what you're choosing, Isabella. Daniel has no resources, no medical equipment, no way to provide the level of care you need. If you try to leave here to be with him, your condition will deteriorate rapidly. Dr. Patel as much as told you that. She told me to choose what I want my remaining time to look like. And what do you want? A few weeks of playing house with the help before your kidneys fail completely? Or months, possibly a year, of quality care that could extend your life significantly? It was a devil's bargain, dressed up as practicality. I want, Isabella said slowly, to not die alone. I want someone to hold my hand who actually cares if I'm holding theirs back. I want to matter to someone. And you're offering me survival without life, Richard. That's not a choice. That's a prison sentence. It's reality. No. Reality is that I'm dying whether I stay or go. The only question is whether I do it with dignity and love or with comfort and emptiness. Richard's face hardened. If you leave, I'll make sure Daniel never works again. I have connections, Isabella. I can destroy his professional reputation with a few phone calls. Make it impossible for him to find employment. Is that what you want? To ruin his life along with your own? The threat landed like a physical blow. You wouldn't. Try me. He assaulted me in my own home. I have witnesses. Well, you're a witness, though I doubt you'd testify honestly. But I have security cameras in the kitchen. The footage is quite clear. Isabella's blood ran cold. Richard was many things, but he rarely bluffed. So here's what's going to happen, Richard continued, his voice maddeningly calm. You're going to rest. Take the medication Dr. Patel prescribed. Think about what I've offered. And tomorrow, you're going to tell me you're ready to move forward sensibly. For both your sakes. He stood, dismissing her like an employee. I have calls to make regarding Singapore. We'll discuss this further at dinner. Isabella left his office on shaking legs, made it to the bathroom before she vomited, stress and despair and medication mixing toxically. She stayed there on the cold tile for a long time, forehead pressed against the porcelain, trying to figure out how her life had become a choice between survival and soul. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Asterisk, it's Daniel. New phone. Are you okay? Asterisk. Her fingers trembled as she typed. Asterisk, no. He's threatening you. Threatening to ruin you if I leave. I don't know what to do. Asterisk. The response came quickly. Asterisk, don't worry about me. I can handle Richard. Are you safe? Asterisk. Asterisk, physically, yes. Otherwise, no. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm staying at a motel near the gallery. I'm not leaving the area. I'm not leaving you. Asterisk. Tears blurred her vision. Asterisk, he has footage of you hitting him. Says he'll use it to destroy you. Says you'll never work again. Asterisk. A long pause. Then, asterisk, let him. I don't care about work. I care about you. What do you want, Isabella? Asterisk. What did she want? She wanted to be with Daniel. Wanted to wake up beside him every morning and fall asleep in his arms every night. Wanted to paint while he read. Wanted to visit galleries and coffee shops and live whatever time she had left as fully, honestly, intensely as possible. But she also didn't want to be the reason he lost everything. Didn't want to take him from stability into chaos. Didn't want him to watch her deteriorate rapidly because she'd chosen love over medical care. I want you, she typed. But I don't know if that's fair to either of us. Asterisk, life isn't fair. We both know that. But we get to choose what we do with the unfairness. I choose you. The question is what you choose. Asterisk. Isabella stared at the phone, Daniel's words burning into her retinas. What did she choose? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Richard left for the office, making it clear he expected her to come to her senses by evening. Dr. Patel called to check on her, voice carefully neutral, offering to arrange a counselor if needed. The sedatives sat untouched on her nightstand. Isabella spent the afternoon in her studio, staring at the unfinished painting. Two figures bleeding into each other, boundaries dissolving. She picked up a brush with trembling hands and added more color. Red now. Deep, arterial red that looked like heartbreak or birth or both. The painting wasn't beautiful. It was raw, messy, emotionally violent. It was honest. When she finished, or gave up, she wasn't sure which. She sat back and looked at what she'd created. It looked like a choice being made. Like someone deciding to feel everything, even knowing it would hurt. Her phone buzzed again. Daniel, I've been thinking. About what your mother used to say. That intensity matters more than duration. I think she was right. I think a week of real life is worth more than a year of existing. But that's easy for me to say. I'm not the one who's sick. So I need you to choose for yourself, not for me. What does your heart say? Asterisk. Isabella's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her heart said, asterisk jump. Risk everything. Choose love over safety. Die on your own terms, not Richard's, asterisk. But her practical mind said, asterisk, you'll deteriorate faster. You'll burden Daniel with your decline. You'll die in a motel room instead of a mansion, and that's not romantic, it's tragic, asterisk. She typed and deleted 6 different responses before finally settling on. Asterisk, can we talk? In person. I need to see your face to make this choice. Asterisk. Where? Asterisk, the gallery. My mother's gallery. Tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'll be there. Isabella. Asterisk. Yes? Asterisk, whatever you decide, I understand. I won't be angry. I won't disappear. You get to choose your own life, and I'll respect that choice. Promise, asterisk. She set the phone down, curled up on the studio floor beneath her violent, honest painting, and cried until there was nothing left inside her but clarity. That night at dinner, Richard was cordial, almost kind, a calculated performance designed to show her what life could be like if she accepted his terms. The food was impeccable, the wine expensive, the conversation carefully neutral. I've arranged for a specialist to consult on your case, he said over dessert. Someone from Johns Hopkins, the best in the field. She'll be here next week to assess whether we can slow the deterioration. That's very generous. You're my wife, Isabella. I want you to have every chance. He paused, studying her. I know I haven't been attentive. These past months. I can do better. We'll do better. If you stay. It was the closest thing to an apology Richard had ever offered. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a man so disconnected from his own emotions that he literally couldn't understand what he was asking her to give up. Richard, she said carefully, do you love me? He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Of course. No. Really love me. Not the idea of me. Not my connections or what I represent. Me. The person. Do you know what my favorite color is? Blue. Green. Sage green, specifically. The color of new growth. She smiled sadly. Do you know what my mother's gallery was called? The Morrison Gallery. And do you know why I go there matters to me? Silence. You don't know me, Richard. You never did. And I don't think you particularly want to. I think you want a wife who fits into your life without disrupting it. Who looks good at charity events and doesn't ask for emotional intimacy. And I can't be that person anymore. I don't have time to be that person. Richard's expression hardened. So you've made your choice. I need one more day. Tomorrow. Then I'll give you an answer. What happens tomorrow? I'm meeting Daniel. To talk. To figure out what I really want. I could forbid you from going. You could, but you won't. Because if you do, you'll prove everything I just said about not knowing me. About not actually caring what I need. She met his eyes steadily. Give me tomorrow, Richard. Give me that much, at least. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, fine. Tomorrow. But Isabella? If you choose him, understand what you're choosing. Understand that I won't, support you financially or medically once you leave. You'll be completely on your own. I understand. And you're willing to die faster for the sake of what? Romance. Some fantasy of true love. Isabella thought about Daniel's hands steadying her when she painted. About his voice reading Jane Eyre in the firelight. About the way he'd held her through the fever and the storm and every moment of vulnerability in between. I'm willing to die having lived, she said quietly. However briefly. Yes. Richard pushed back from the table, his meal half finished. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it'll be mine." After he left, Isabella sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by expensive china and crystal and all the trappings of wealth that had never once made her happy. Tomorrow she would go to the gallery. Tomorrow she would see Daniel. Tomorrow she would choose. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something that wasn't resignation or fear or despair. She felt free. That night, lying in bed, Isabella touched the silver bracelet on her wrist. Cor Fortis, brave heart. Her mother had given her this. Had commissioned it for Emma, for Daniel's daughter, as a reminder to be brave. And somehow, impossibly, it had led her here. To this moment. This choice. "Okay, Mom," she whispered into the darkness. "Okay, Catherine. I'm listening. I'm being brave." She didn't know if her mother could hear her. Didn't know if Rachel could hear Daniel wherever he was. Didn't know if Emma was somewhere watching over her father, hoping he'd choose life over grief. But she chose to believe they were. Chose to believe that love was bigger than death, that connection transcended time, that her mother's final gift had been bringing her someone who saw her, truly saw her, even as she was dying. Tomorrow she would choose that gift. Tomorrow she would choose Daniel. Tomorrow she would choose to live whatever life she had left as honestly, intensely, courageously as possible. Cor Fortis, she thought, and finally, fell asleep. The Morrison Gallery looked different in morning light. Softer somehow, less like a memorial, and more like a promise. Isabella arrived early, her heart hammering against her ribs with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Richard had been coldly civil at breakfast, providing a car and driver without comment, his silence more eloquent than any argument. She dressed carefully. Not the expensive designer clothes Richard preferred, but a simple green dress she'd bought years ago, before illness had redefined her wardrobe. It hung looser now, her body diminished by months of decline, but it was hers. Her choice. The gallery wasn't open yet, but the owner, an elderly woman who'd known her mother, let her in with a knowing smile and a gentle squeeze of her hand. "Take all the time you need, dear." Isabella wandered through the familiar space, stopping before the plaque that bore her mother's name. Catherine Morrison Ashford, who taught us that the most important art is the art of truly seeing each other. "I'm trying, Mom," she whispered. "I'm trying to see clearly. You always have." She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, backlit by morning sun, looking simultaneously exhausted and more alive than she'd ever seen him. He wore jeans and a worn sweater, no servant's uniform, no professional distance. Just Daniel. Just the man she loved. They stood there for a moment, drinking each other in across the gallery space, neither quite brave enough to close the distance yet. "You came," Isabella said unnecessarily. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I didn't know. After yesterday, after everything Richard said." He could have said anything. Daniel took a step forward. Could have threatened anything. "It wouldn't have changed the fact that I love you. That I'll be here whenever you need me. However you need me." Isabella's eyes filled. "Even if I choose to stay with him? For the medical care." Daniel flinched, but his voice remained steady. "Even then, I told you, you get to choose your own life. I meant it. And if I choose you, knowing it means I deteriorate faster? Knowing I'll be a burden? Knowing you'll have to watch me die, possibly soon, possibly," her voice cracked. "Possibly badly?" He crossed to her then, closing the distance in 3 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with devastating gentleness. "Isabella, listen to me. I've already watched people I love die. I've already survived the worst thing I thought could happen. And you want to know what I learned?" She nodded, unable to speak. "That love doesn't become less worth it because it ends. That the time I had with Rachel and Emma, even knowing how it would end, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Every moment mattered. Every laugh, every argument, every ordinary Tuesday morning eating cereal together. It all mattered because we were together. Because we were real." Tears were streaming down Isabella's face now. "I'm so scared, Daniel. I'm scared of making the wrong choice. Of hurting you. Of dying too fast or suffering too much or—" "I know. I'm scared too. But here's what I realized last night, lying in that terrible motel room. I'm more scared of not trying. Of playing it safe and missing whatever time we could have had. Of you dying surrounded by expensive equipment and people who don't actually love you, while I'm somewhere else knowing I could have been there. Should have been there. Richard will make things difficult. He'll. Let him. I don't care about Richard. I don't care about his threats or his lawyers or his money. I care about you. about waking up beside you, about reading to you and watching you paint and holding your hand through whatever comes next. His thumb brushed away her tears. So I'm asking you, what do you want? Not what's practical. Not what makes sense. What does your heart want? Isabella looked into his eyes, those warm, whiskey-colored eyes that had first seen her through fever darkness and had never stopped seeing her since. She thought about her mother's words, intensity over duration, about the bracelet on her wrist and the impossible connection that had brought them together, about Jane Eyre demanding to be seen as an equal, about Emma's fearlessness and Rachel's fierce caring, about the fact that she was dying anyway, and the only question left was how she wanted to spend whatever time remained. You, she said, her voice breaking and mending around the word. I want you. I want morning coffee and terrible poetry and days at galleries. I want to paint while you read. I want to fight and make up and be honest even when it hurts. I want, she laughed through her tears. I want to die having lived, really lived, with someone who loves me. And I love you, Daniel. God, I love you so much. His face transformed, grief and joy and relief all tangled together. Are you sure? Because once you choose this, I'm not letting go. I'm not walking away. I'm going to be there for every moment, beautiful or ugly, and I'm going to love you through all of it. So you need to be sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Daniel kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promise. A kiss that tasted like courage and coffee and the strange, fierce joy of choosing each other despite impossible odds. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing and clinging to each other like drowning people who'd finally found shore. Okay, he said, pressing his forehead to hers. Okay, so we do this. We figure out the logistics. I have some savings, not much, but enough to get us started. We'll need to find somewhere to live. Arrange for medical care. Maybe Dr. Patel can recommend someone who does home visits. We'll need equipment, medications. I have money, Isabella interrupted. My mother left me a trust. Richard never touched it because it wasn't enough to matter to him, but it's enough for us. For medical care and living expenses and, she smiled through tears, and maybe a small house somewhere. Nothing fancy, just somewhere that's ours. Isabella Ashford, are you proposing we run away together? I'm proposing we live together. However long that is. Do you want that? More than anything. He kissed her again, softer this time. More than anything in the world. The next hours were a blur of necessary complications. Isabella called Richard from the gallery, her hand steady despite her racing heart. I'm not coming back, she said simply. I'm choosing Daniel. I'm choosing to live on my own terms. The silence on the other end was glacial. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's mine to make. I meant what I said about cutting you off. Financially. Medically. All of it. I know. I have my own resources. And Richard, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't the wife you needed. I'm sorry I couldn't be content with what you could offer. But I'm not sorry for choosing love. I hope someday you understand that. He hung up without responding. Isabella stared at the phone for a moment, feeling the weight of a marriage ending, a life chapter closing. Then she called Dr. Patel. I need your help, she said. I'm leaving my husband. I'll need medical care. Someone who can come to wherever we end up living. Who can help manage my condition without hospital equipment. Is that possible? Dr. Patel was quiet for a long moment. It's possible. It won't be easy. Your decline may be faster without access to certain treatments. But Isabella, I think you already know that. And I think you've decided it's worth it. I have. Then I'll make some calls. There are excellent palliative care specialists who handle home cases. And for what it's worth, I think you're very brave. Cor Fortis, Isabella thought, touching her bracelet. The third call was harder, to her father, who she hadn't spoken to in months, explaining everything in a rush of words that probably didn't make sense but came from somewhere true. Dad, I know this sounds insane, but I'm leaving Richard. I've fallen in love with someone else, and I'm choosing to spend whatever time I have left being happy instead of safe. Please don't try to talk me out of it. Please just support me. That's all I need. Her father's voice was rough when he finally spoke. Your mother would be proud of you. She made that exact same choice. Chose 2 years of love with me over playing it safe and spending her last years alone. I never regretted it, and I don't think you will either. Isabella sobbed with relief. Thank you. Thank you for understanding. Bring him to meet me. This Daniel. I want to meet the man who made my daughter brave enough to choose life. I will. I promise. They found a house 3 days later, a small cottage an hour outside the city, with good light for painting and a garden that had been loved but was now overgrown. It needed work, but it had something the mansion never had: warmth, possibility, the feeling of home. It's perfect, Isabella said, standing in the living room with its brick fireplace and wide windows. It needs a lot of renovation, Daniel warned. The plumbing is questionable, and I think there's a family of raccoons living in the attic. Still perfect. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. Okay, then it's ours. They moved in a week later with minimal possessions: her art supplies, his books, Emma's bracelet alongside Isabella's, and a photograph of the 4 people who'd somehow orchestrated this impossible connection. Catherine and Rachel, smiling in a photo they found tucked into one of Isabella's mother's old sketchbooks, young and alive and best friends. Dr. Patel arranged for a palliative care nurse, a kind woman named Joan who came twice a week and didn't bat an eye at their unconventional situation. She set up what medical equipment Isabella needed, taught Daniel how to manage her medications, and most importantly, treated them like people instead of a scandal. You're doing well, Joan said after the 2nd week. Blood pressure's actually better than your last readings. I think the stress reduction is helping. Turns out being happy is good medicine, Isabella said, squeezing Daniel's hand. Imagine that. The weeks that followed were both harder and more beautiful than Isabella had imagined. Her body did decline, slowly but noticeably. Some mornings she couldn't get out of bed without help. Some days the pain was bad enough that she could barely speak. The dialysis equipment Dr. Patel had warned about became necessary sooner than hoped. But there were mornings when Daniel brought her coffee in bed, and they watched the sun rise through their bedroom window, painted gold and pink and perfect. There were afternoons when she painted, even when her hands shook, even when she could only work for 20 minutes at a time, and created some of the most honest work of her life. Daniel would sit beside her, reading aloud from Jane Eyre or Keats or whatever book struck his fancy, and the hours would pass in companionable creativity. There were evenings when they cooked together, simple meals, nothing fancy, but made with care. Daniel standing behind her to help her stir when she got tired, both of them laughing when she accidentally added salt instead of sugar to the cookies. There were nights when he held her through the pain, when morphine couldn't quite reach the ache, and he'd tell her stories about Emma, finally able to remember without drowning in guilt. Stories about Rachel. Stories about the life he'd had before loss had carved him hollow. Do you think they'd approve? Isabella asked one night, curled against his chest. Rachel and Catherine? Emma. I think Rachel would demand to know my intentions. Daniel's smile was sad but genuine. And Emma would ask if we knew any astronauts yet, and why not, and could we please find out because it was very important. And my mother? I think Catherine would say you're doing exactly what she taught you. Living intensely. Creating honestly. Loving bravely. I hope so. Isabella traced patterns on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. I hope they're somewhere together. Laughing about how they managed to orchestrate all this from beyond. Cosmic matchmaking. The best kind. What does living fully mean to you, comfort and safety, or risk and truth? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. 6 months after leaving Richard, Isabella held her first art exhibition, small, intimate, at her mother's gallery. A dozen paintings, all from the cottage period, all devastatingly honest about love and loss and the courage it took to choose life over survival. The opening was packed. Her father came, crying openly as he studied her work. Dr. Patel came with her partner, both of them smiling at the portrait Isabella had done of Joan, the nurse who'd made home care feel like care instead of clinical necessity. And Daniel stood beside her all night, one arm around her waist, supporting her weight as exhaustion threatened to pull her under, whispering encouragement when visitors praised her work, making her laugh when the art critic from the Times asked pretentious questions about her use of negative space. That one, the critic said, pointing to the painting Isabella had done during the storm. 2 figures bleeding into each other, boundaries dissolving. What's the title? Isabella looked up at Daniel, who looked back at her with such love it made her chest ache. Cor Fortis, she said. Brave heart. And the meaning? It means that love is the bravest thing we do. That choosing connection despite inevitable loss is the only thing that makes life worth living. That sometimes the people we're meant to find are the ones we never expected to need. The critic nodded, scribbling notes, completely missing the way Daniel's hand tightened on Isabella's hip, the way her eyes filled with tears, the way this painting was their entire story distilled into color and form. After the critic moved on, Daniel leaned down to murmur in her ear. Ready to go home? More than ready. They made their goodbyes, promising to return for the closing reception, and escaped into the autumn evening. The car ride home was quiet, Isabella's head on Daniel's shoulder, his hand holding hers, both of them exhausted and content. That was incredible, he said as they pulled up to the cottage. You were incredible. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to. Inside, Daniel helped her change into comfortable clothes, then carried her to the couch. She was too tired to walk, but too wired to sleep. He built a fire, made tea, and settled beside her with a new book he'd found at the local bookstore. What are we reading tonight? Isabella asked, curling against him. And Carson. Poetry. Essays about Eros and loss and ancient Greek tragedy. I thought you'd like it. Perfect. She closed her eyes, listening to his voice, feeling the warmth of fire and tea and the man she loved. Daniel. Thank you. For all of this. For choosing me. For making these months the happiest of my life. His voice was rough when he answered. Thank you for letting me. For choosing me back. For teaching me that it's okay to live again. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the book forgotten. Outside, autumn leaves rustled in wind that promised winter. Inside, two people who'd been lost had found each other and built something that felt like forever, even though they both knew it wasn't. Isabella. Daniel said eventually. Yes. Marry me. She pulled back to look at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me. I know you're technically still married to Richard. The divorce isn't final yet. And I know we don't have much time. But I want you to be my wife. Really my wife. I want to stand somewhere with witnesses and declare publicly that you're the person I choose. That I'm the person you chose. Will you marry me? Isabella was crying now, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes. God, yes. Of course, yes. He kissed her, tasting salt and joy and the strange bittersweetness of promising forever when forever might only be months or weeks. We'll do it small, he said against her lips. Just your father and Joan and whoever else you want. In the garden maybe before winter comes. Perfect. It's perfect. They married 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning with frost still sparkling on the overgrown garden. Isabella wore a simple white dress, her mother's bracelet gleaming on one wrist, Emma's bracelet, which Daniel had given her the night he proposed, on the other. Daniel wore a suit that had belonged to his father, looking nervous and handsome and so full of love it made everyone present cry. The ceremony was brief, officiated by a friend of Dr. Patel's who understood they were working against borrowed time. But the vows were everything. Isabella, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the tears tracking down his face. You saved me. Not from grief. Grief is part of me now, part of who I am. But you saved me from disappearing, from living like a ghost. You taught me that I could love again, that I could feel again, that life, however brief, however painful, is always worth choosing. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to hold your hand through the fear and the pain, to help you create and laugh and live as fully as possible, to see you, always, to love you, forever. Isabella could barely speak through her tears. Daniel, you saw me when I was invisible. You stayed when I begged you not to leave. You made me want to fight for more time, not because I'm afraid of dying, but because I want more mornings and afternoons and nights with you. I promise to be honest with you, to let you help me, to create with whatever strength I have, to love you as fiercely and fully as I know how. However long we have, I'm yours, completely, forever. They exchanged rings, simple silver bands that matched the bracelets. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said, smiling through her own tears. You may. Daniel was already kissing her, already gathering her into his arms, already murmuring promises against her lips that only she could hear. Their wedding party of 6 applauded. Isabella's father sobbed openly. Joan dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. And somewhere, Isabella chose to believe, Catherine and Rachel were applauding too. Celebrating the love they'd somehow orchestrated from beyond, the connection they'd made possible with 2 silver bracelets, and the courage they'd instilled in their children. Cor Fortis, Isabella thought as Daniel lifted her into his arms to carry her back inside, laughing at the ridiculousness and rightness of it all. Brave hearts. Winter came early that year. Isabella's decline accelerated as the days shortened. Dr. Patel and Joan both gentle, but honest about what was happening, about the fact that they were measuring time in weeks now, maybe days. But they were good weeks. Honest weeks. Weeks filled with love and laughter and the fierce, bright intensity of people who knew each other was temporary and chose each other anyway. Daniel read to her when she was too tired to paint, held her when the pain got bad, slept curled around her every night, his heartbeat the lullaby that carried her through the darkness. They talked about everything, their regrets, their joys, their shared belief that love was bigger than death. "I'm not afraid anymore," Isabella said one evening, her voice thin but clear. They were in bed, watching snow fall outside their window, Daniel's arms around her. "I thought I would be. Thought dying would feel like losing. But it doesn't. It feels like I got to live. Really live. Even if only for a little while." Daniel's arms tightened. "You're the bravest person I've ever known. Only because you showed me how. You and Emma and Rachel. You taught me that fear doesn't mean you stop choosing love. It means you choose it harder. Choose it more fiercely." "Isabella," his voice broke. I know you're scared. But Daniel, you're going to be okay. You're going to grieve. That's right and good and necessary. But then you're going to keep living. You're going to remember that life is worth it. You're going to. How can you ask me to do that? To just keep going after your. Because I'll still be here. Not like this, maybe. But in the paintings. In the garden you're going to fix up next spring. In every gallery you visit. In the students you'll teach again someday. She touched his face, committing every line to memory. You don't lose people, Daniel. They change form. They become memory and legacy and the courage they taught you. Your love for Rachel and Emma didn't disappear when they died. It transformed. Made you who you are. Made you capable of loving me. And your love for me? It'll transform too. Into whatever comes next. I don't want whatever comes next. I want you. Now. Always. I know, love. I know. She kissed him softly. But you'll keep going anyway. Because that's what brave hearts do. Isabella Ashford Cross died on a Tuesday morning in early December, in her own bed, surrounded by love. Daniel was beside her, holding her hand, whispering that he loved her, that she'd been extraordinary, that she'd changed his life in every way that mattered. Her father was there, tears streaming down his face, telling her that Catherine would be so proud. Joan was there, monitoring vitals but mostly just bearing witness, giving them space and privacy for goodbye. At the end, Isabella opened her eyes one last time, looked at Daniel with perfect clarity and perfect love. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me. I see you," he promised. "Always. Forever. I see you." She smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile he'd fallen in love with, and closed her eyes. And Daniel held her as she slipped away, held her as her breathing slowed and stilled, held her as the sun rose through their window and painted everything gold. The funeral was small, held at the gallery where they'd chosen each other. Isabella's paintings surrounded them, her legacy of honest emotion and fearless creation. Daniel stood before them, barely holding himself together, and tried to put into words what she'd meant. "Isabella taught me that intensity matters more than duration. That choosing love, even knowing it will end, is the bravest thing we do." She turned her illness into art, her loneliness into connection, her fear into courage. And she did it all with grace and honesty and more strength than she ever gave herself credit for. He held up the silver bracelet, Emma's bracelet, the one Isabella had worn beside her own. "These were made by Isabella's mother for my daughter. Two little girls who never met, but whose bracelets somehow found their way to us. Brought us together across impossible distance. Gave us both a reminder to be brave when everything else said to hide." He paused, voice breaking. "I don't know if there's cosmic design or just impossible coincidence, but I choose to believe that love is bigger than we understand. That the people we lose don't really leave, they just take different forms. And Isabella, my wife, my brave heart, she taught me that living fully means risking everything. Means choosing connection even when loss is guaranteed. Means being alive instead of just surviving. She saved me," he finished. "And I will spend the rest of my life honoring that gift by living the way she taught me. Intensely, honestly, bravely, the way she lived until her very last breath." 5 years later, Daniel Cross stood in the Morrison Gallery, now renamed the Morrison Ashford Gallery in honor of both women whose vision had shaped it. Watching students from the local university studying Isabella's paintings. He'd returned to teaching 3 years after her death, taking a position at a small liberal arts college where he could share his love of literature with a new generation. His course on Victorian literature was always over-enrolled, partly because he was good at his job, but mostly because students could sense the depth of experience behind his lectures. He taught them about Jane Eyre demanding to be seen as an equal, about how the Brontes understood that real love meant choosing someone with clear eyes, knowing their flaws, and loving them anyway. He never mentioned Isabella by name, but she was there in every lesson about courage and choice and the power of being truly seen. The gallery had become a second home. He visited every week, sometimes to look at Isabella's work, sometimes to discover new artists the way she once had. He'd even curated a few exhibitions, emerging artists whose work was raw and honest and emotionally true, just like Isabella had taught him. Today, though, was special. Today was the 5th anniversary of her death, and the gallery was hosting a retrospective of her work. All of it, from the lonely rooms she'd painted during her marriage to Richard to the fierce, beautiful pieces from the cottage. "Excuse me, Professor Cross?" Daniel turned to find a young woman, early 20s, with paint under her fingernails and hope in her eyes. "Yes, I'm an artist, MFA student, and I wanted to tell you that Isabella's work changed my life. The way she painted emotion so honestly, the way she wasn't afraid to show pain and joy and fear all tangled together, that's what I want to do, what I'm trying to do." Daniel smiled, feeling the familiar ache that came with Isabella's name. 5 years, and it still hurt. But it was a good hurt. A hurt that meant love had been real. She would have loved to hear that, he said. Isabella believed that the most important art was art that made people feel less alone. Sounds like her work did that for you. It did. And, the young woman hesitated. I heard you were her husband, that you took care of her, that you loved her even though she was dying. That's really beautiful. That you chose each other anyway. She chose me first, Daniel said, touching the silver bracelet he still wore on his wrist, Emma's bracelet, alongside the wedding ring Isabella had given him. I'm just grateful I was brave enough to choose her back. After the student left, Daniel stood alone before his favorite painting, *Cor Fortis*, the one of 2 figures bleeding into each other, boundaries dissolving. It hung in the place of honor, with a plaque beneath. Isabella Ashford Cross, 1989-2019. Intensity matters more than duration. I knew Isabella socially. Before she got sick. She was extraordinary, brilliant and passionate and alive. And Richard, Marcus shook his head. Richard never deserved her. Never saw what he had. And I didn't speak up. Didn't question the way he treated her. I should have. I regret that. Why are you telling me this? Because you did speak up. You saw her, loved her, gave her happiness in her last months. And I wanted to say, the man's voice cracked. I wanted to say thank you for giving Isabella what Richard never could, for making sure she didn't die alone and invisible, for being brave enough to choose her. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, forgiveness, maybe, or understanding, or just the recognition that Isabella's impact had been wider than he'd known. She was easy to love, he said simply. The hard part was having to let her go. But you did love her. Fully. Completely. That's rare. Marcus gestured at the paintings surrounding them. That's what all this is. Evidence that love doesn't die. It transforms. After Marcus left, Daniel stood alone with Isabella's work, surrounded by evidence of her courage and creativity and the fierce, bright way she'd lived her final months. I'm going to be okay, Isabella, he said softly. Like you promised. I'm living. Really living. Not hiding. Not running. Just existing in the world with an open heart. It's terrifying. But you taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means choosing love anyway. He touched Emma's bracelet, then his wedding ring, feeling the weight of love and loss and the continuation of both. Cor Fortis, he whispered. Brave heart. And somehow, in the way that love works, in the way that memory transforms into presence, he felt Isabella smile. Felt Rachel and Emma and Catherine smile too, wherever they were, celebrating the connections they'd made possible, the courage they'd taught, the love that survived death by becoming art and memory, and the strength to keep choosing life, even when it hurt. Daniel stayed until the gallery closed, watching people moved by Isabella's work, hearing strangers talk about how her paintings made them feel seen and less alone. Then he walked out into the December evening, 5 years to the day after losing her, and felt something that might have been peace. She'd saved him. He'd loved her. And that would always, always be enough. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about forever. They're about choosing to love fully in whatever time we have. If you could tell someone you love one thing today, what would it be? Share with us below. And if this story touched you, let us know. Your comments mean everything.